Section 1. Mysteries 1 through 10. The nuclear plant and what it has always been hiding. Let's start here. Let's start at the beginning, which in Springfield means starting at the cooling towers. You can see them from almost anywhere in town. Two enormous concrete structures rising above the skyline, cracked down the middle, leaking steam at odd hours, illuminated at night by a faint and unsettling glow. They are so familiar to Springfield's residents that nobody notices them anymore. They are as much a part of the town's backdrop as the church steeple or the tire fire that has been burning near the freeway since approximately 1968. The towers are just there. They have always been there. And most people, when they look at Springfield, see them and feel nothing. That numbness is the first mystery. Because the Springfield nuclear power plant is not a normal facility, it is not a background prop. It is the gravitational center of everything wrong with this town, and the evidence for that has been sitting in plain sight across 36 years of episodes, hiding in jokes and throwaway lines and scenes that the show presents as comedy and then never revisits. This first section is going to take its time. We are going to go through the plant carefully, mystery by mystery, and by the time we reach the end, the cooling towers are going to look very different to you than they did 10 minutes ago. Mystery 1. The 342 violations. A safety inspection of the Springfield nuclear power plant found 342 violations. 342. The show drops this number in a single line during a single scene and then moves on to something else. But think about what 342 violations actually means. A standard nuclear facility in the United States operates under the oversight of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. A serious violation, a single serious violation, triggers an immediate investigation, mandatory reporting to federal authorities, potential shutdown proceedings, and, in extreme cases, criminal referrals. One violation can end careers and close facilities. The Springfield plant had 342 of them. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to code was $56 million. Mr. Burns, a man whose personal fortune is measured in the billions, declined to pay it, not because he couldn't. He declined because paying it would mean acknowledging the violations existed, and acknowledging the violations existed would mean someone might start asking what those violations had already done to the town living directly downwind. So the violations remained, for decades. Across hundreds of episodes, the plant continued operating with cracked cooling towers, luminous rats running through its service corridors, radioactive waste being dumped into local bodies of water, and plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. These are not exaggerations. These are things the show shows you directly, in canon, and then expects you to accept as jokes. The first mystery of the Springfield nuclear power plant is not that the violations exist. The mystery is that they were never fixed, never seriously investigated, and never resulted in any meaningful consequence for the man who allowed them to accumulate. Mystery 2. The human skeletons in the basement. The show reveals at one point that there are human skeletons in the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant. Human skeletons. The episode does not explain who these people were. It does not explain how they ended up dead inside a working reactor facility. It does not explain whether they were employees, trespassers, or something else entirely. The skeletons are simply shown. The scene moves on. The characters do not react with horror or confusion. The skeletons are treated as background detail, the same way you might treat a filing cabinet or a water cooler. In any real-world context, the discovery of human remains inside a nuclear facility would be a federal crime scene. There would be investigations. There would be identifications. There would be questions about who authorized access to the area, who knew about the remains, and how long they had been there. In Springfield, there is none of that. The bones are there, nobody asks why, nobody asks how, and the show never returns to them. This is a mystery the show introduced and simply abandoned. But it is not a small mystery. It is a question about whether people have died inside that plant, whether those deaths were covered up, and whether the man who owns the facility has blood on his hands that extends far beyond radioactive contamination. Mystery 3. The safety inspector who was hired to fail. Homer Simpson is the safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Homer Simpson, a man whose own creator has stated possesses an IQ of 55. Homer Simpson, a man who, in a later episode, discovers that a crayon has been physically lodged in his brain since childhood, actively suppressing his cognitive function. Homer Simpson, a man who has slept at his workstation during meltdown warnings, caused at least one nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would grow bigger, and has spent decades performing a job that exists specifically to prevent the plant from poisoning the town. The mystery here is not that Homer is bad at his job. The mystery is why he was hired for it in the first place, and why he has never been permanently removed from it. The show actually answers this, and the answer is deeply unsettling. When German investors briefly purchased the plant and took over operations, the first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the true cost of bringing the facility up to regulatory standards, and the estimate nearly bankrupted them. They sold the plant back to Burns almost immediately. Burns bought it back and rehired Homer on his very first day of renewed ownership. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down. A competent safety inspector would document violations, report them to regulatory authorities, and trigger the chain of federal oversight that Burns has been avoiding for decades. Homer does not do any of those things. Homer sleeps, Homer eats donuts, Homer loses paperwork and misses readings and fills out forms with crayon. Burns did not hire Homer despite his incompetence. Burns hired Homer because of it. Homer's continued employment is not a comedy bit. It is the single most important structural decision Burns has ever made, and it has kept the plant running and the violations hidden for 30-plus years. Mystery 4. Blinky the Three-Eyed Fish and the Question Nobody Asked. In the second season of the show, a fish is pulled from a river near the nuclear power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. The fish named Blinky by the media becomes a minor national sensation within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as campaign evidence that Burns is poisoning the local environment. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to prove it is safe. The audience watches, shrugs, and the storyline ends. Nobody conducts a follow-up water quality study. Nobody tests the river. Nobody tests any other fish. Nobody asks the obvious question that the episode is essentially shouting at the viewer. If the fish downstream from the nuclear plant have grown a third eye, what is happening to the people who have been drinking the same water? Blinky is introduced as evidence of environmental contamination and then treated as a one-off joke. But within the internal logic of the show, a three-eyed fish is proof. It is biological evidence that something from the plant is altering living organisms at the genetic level. The mutation is visible, documentable, and directly linked to the plant's runoff. The mystery is not what caused Blinky's third eye. The mystery is why the existence of that fish did not trigger a cascade of further investigation. Why the fish became a joke instead of a crisis. And what it means for every other living thing that drinks from that same river. Mystery 5. The green glow that Burns walks around with. In the episode known as The Springfield Files, Homer encounters a figure in the woods near Springfield that he becomes convinced is an alien. The entire town panics. FBI agents familiar to fans of science fiction television are brought in to investigate. The episode builds toward a dramatic reveal. The figure is not an alien. It is Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so chemically and radiologically intensive that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment is what keeps him alive. Without it, he dies within the week. After each session, Burns wanders out of the medical facility in a dazed and euphoric state, stumbling through the woods in the dark, his skin radiating a cold greenish light. The people of Springfield see this glowing figure moving through the trees, and their first instinct is not radiation. Their first instinct is not the massive nuclear facility they can see from their front yards. Their first instinct is extraterrestrial life. That disconnect is the mystery. Burns is so saturated with radiation either from his own treatments or from decades of proximity to his reactor that his body literally produces visible light. He glows in the dark. And the people who have been living in the shadow of his plant for 30 years see that glow and think, alien. Not, that is what the plant does to a person. Not, that is what we are becoming. Not, if our employer glows like that, what are we doing to ourselves? Just, alien. That level of denial, that complete disconnection between the obvious cause and the obvious effect, does not happen by accident in a population. It requires conditioning. It requires that the population's capacity for critical thinking has been, in some systematic way, compromised. Mystery 6. The Dome and What It Means. In the Simpsons movie, the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency, operating as a real institution within the show's universe, determines that Springfield has become so environmentally contaminated that the only viable solution is physical containment. They seal the entire town under a massive glass dome. Let that sentence settle. The United States government, having assessed the situation in Springfield, concluded that the town was so toxic, so fundamentally compromised as an environmental zone, that it posed a contamination risk to the surrounding region. Their solution was not cleanup. Their solution was not remediation. Their solution was a dome, a permanent physical barrier between Springfield and the rest of the country. Springfield is not just a polluted town in the movie's logic. Springfield is classified as an environmental containment zone by the federal government. The people inside the dome, every single person who has been drinking the water, breathing the air, eating the food grown in the soil, are inside it when the dome goes up. They are sealed in. The mystery that the movie never addresses is what happens to those people over time. If the contamination was severe enough to require a dome, the contamination inside that dome does not disappear when the glass comes down. It continues. The same people who were already being exposed keep being exposed, now without even the marginal dilution of outside air. Springfield's residents have been living inside what amounts to an environmental hazard zone for decades. The dome simply makes it official. Mystery 7. Why the yellow skin only appears inside Springfield. Every resident of Springfield has yellow skin. Every single one. This is, on the surface, simply the art style of the show. Matt Groening chose yellow as the skin color for his characters because it would stand out on television screens in a way that flesh tones would not. This is the accepted explanation, and it is almost certainly true as a production decision. But within the internal logic of the show, there is something much stranger happening. When celebrities visit Springfield, when real-world figures appear as guest characters, they are drawn differently. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are more normally shaped. Their features more closely resemble human anatomy. They do not have yellow skin. When characters from outside Springfield appear, when the show depicts people who live elsewhere, they look different, less distorted, more recognizably human in their proportions. The show draws outsiders differently from Springfield residents. And while the production explanation is that guest characters retain their real-world appearance for recognizability, the in-universe implication is genuinely strange. Within Springfield's own world, there is a visible, observable biological difference between people who live there and people who do not. The residents of the contamination zone look one way. The people outside it look another. The yellow is universal inside Springfield. It touches every person, every family, every background character who has spent their life in the town. And it stops at the town's borders. Mystery 8. The animals and what they tell us. Blinky the fish is not alone. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, displays the same bulging, exaggerated eyes as his owners. His physical proportions deviate from what you would expect in a real greyhound, in exactly the same ways that the Simpson family's proportions deviate from real human anatomy. The wildlife around Springfield, the birds, the fish, the occasional bear that wanders into town, all display characteristics consistent with an environment that has been chemically and radiologically altered. The show depicts this directly, most famously with Blinky, but the animal mutations are scattered throughout the series if you look for them. The show explicitly tells you that the radiation from the plant is mutating living organisms in Springfield. It shows you a fish with 3 eyes and labels it as evidence of environmental contamination. And then it expects you to believe that the exact same contamination, from the exact same source, in the exact same water supply, has had zero effect on the humans living alongside those animals. That is not how contamination works. That is not how radiation works. If the biological systems of Springfield's animals are visibly altered, the biological systems of Springfield's people are being altered too. The question is only whether the alteration is as dramatic and visible in humans as it is in fish. Given the yellow skin, the 4-fingered hands, the overbites, the bulging eyes, and the physical resilience that allows Springfield's residents to survive injuries that would kill anyone else, the answer seems fairly clear. Mystery 9. What Burns knows and has always known. Mr. Burns is not ignorant of what his plant is doing to Springfield. The show makes this clear across many episodes, but the evidence becomes undeniable when you look at Burns' own medical situation. Burns undergoes weekly radiation treatments to stay alive. He manages his own radiation exposure with pharmaceutical precision, using experimental medical interventions that require detailed understanding of how radiation interacts with biological systems. He has personal physicians. He funds private medical research. He has an entire infrastructure dedicated to monitoring and managing the effects of radiation on his own body. Burns understands radiation better than anyone in Springfield. He understands it because his life depends on managing it. And a man who understands radiation well enough to keep himself alive through treatments that would kill anyone else understands exactly what uncontrolled radiation exposure does to the people living around a leaking nuclear plant. He knows. He has always known. The mystery is not whether Burns knows. The mystery is how he has operated with that knowledge for decades, watching the town around him mutate, watching the fish grow extra eyes, watching his employees slowly deteriorate and continue to choose profit over disclosure every single time. That is not negligence. Negligence implies a failure of awareness. Burns is aware. Burns is making an active choice, over and over, year after year, to let Springfield absorb the consequences of his facility so that he does not have to. Mystery 10. The town that cannot ask the right question. Here is the mystery that underlies all the others. The people of Springfield are not stupid, not all of them. The town has teachers, doctors, lawyers, scientists, a nuclear physicist named Frink, who has invented technologies that do not exist in the real world. Springfield has intelligent people. It has people who are capable of complex reasoning. And yet not one of them, not the teachers, not the doctors, not the scientists, has ever stood up and asked the fundamental question, what is the power plant doing to us? The fish have 3 eyes. The plant has 342 safety violations. The safety inspector has a crayon in his brain. The owner glows green in the dark. Human skeletons sit undiscovered in the basement. And Springfield keeps buying its electricity from the cracked towers on the hill without a single sustained public inquiry into what those towers are doing to the town beneath them. The coma theory, which we will explore later, offers one explanation for this. The radiation theory offers another. The collective denial we will discuss when we get to the story of Armin Tamzarian offers a third. But the simplest explanation, and sometimes the simplest explanation is the most devastating, is that the plant has already done enough damage to enough people that the population has lost the cognitive capacity to connect the obvious dots. The people of Springfield cannot ask the right question because the plant already made sure they never would. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now, and what time it is where you are. I want to know. And if you are settling in for a long night in Springfield, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next. Number. Section 2. Mysteries 11 through 20. Homer Simpson's hidden past and the architecture of his damage. Homer Simpson is, depending on your perspective, either the funniest character in the history of American television or the saddest. He is a man who survives things that should kill him, forgets things that should define him, and stumbles through a life that is simultaneously richer and more broken than he has ever been capable of understanding. The mysteries surrounding Homer are not really about who he is. They are about who he was supposed to be and what happened to that person before he ever showed up for his first day of work at the plant. Mystery 11. The crayon in the brain. In a 12th season episode, Homer undergoes a medical procedure that reveals something extraordinary. Since childhood, since an accident or incident that the show only partially explains, a crayon has been physically lodged inside Homer Simpson's brain. Not metaphorically, literally. A crayon in his skull, pressing against his frontal lobe and actively suppressing his cognitive function. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ climbs dramatically. He becomes articulate, insightful, and capable of the kind of sustained reasoning that has eluded him his entire adult life. He begins to see the world around him with genuine clarity. He understands his job. He understands his town. He understands the systems that have been operating around him and, more importantly, on him for his entire life. And he hates it. Being smart in Springfield is miserable. Being smart in Springfield means seeing things that the town's social contract insists you do not see. It means understanding that the plant is dangerous, that Burns is exploitative, that the cheerful resignation of daily life in Springfield is not contentment but sedation. Homer sees all of this with the crayon removed, and he finds it unbearable. So he has the crayon put back. He chooses, deliberately and with full awareness, to return to the fog. The mystery is not that he made that choice. Given what he saw, the choice is almost understandable. The mystery is what it means that the choice was available to him. Because Homer can remove the crayon. Homer can, at any moment, walk into a doctor's office and have the thing pulled out of his head and become someone completely different. He chooses not to. Every day, in every episode, Homer is choosing the fog. He is choosing to not understand. And the question the show never asks is whether that choice is made freely or whether it is the only rational response to living in a town that has systematically ensured that understanding is too painful to sustain. Mystery 12. How did the crayon get there? The episode that reveals the crayon focuses on its removal and the aftermath. It does not spend much time on the more fundamental question. How does a crayon end up inside a child's brain? Young Homer apparently pushed the crayon up through his nasal passage, a horrifying accident by any measure. But the mystery is not the mechanism. The mystery is what happened afterward. Homer went through his entire childhood with a foreign object in his brain. He went through adolescence, through school, through medical checkups, through his time at the plant, through decades of visits to Springfield's various doctors and hospitals. Not one of them found it. There are two possible explanations. The first is that Springfield's medical establishment is so catastrophically incompetent that they missed a physical object in a patient's skull across decades of care. This would be consistent with some of what the show depicts about Springfield's healthcare system, which is presented as chronically underfunded and questionably competent. The second explanation is more sinister. What if the crayon was found at some point? What if a doctor discovered it and, for reasons connected to Burns's influence over Springfield's institutions, chose not to remove it? What if Homer's diminished cognitive capacity was known to someone with an interest in maintaining it? The show does not answer this question. It floats the possibility through the details of the episode and then moves on. But the question lingers. If the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised, if the doctors are looking away from things they should be reporting, then Homer's crayon is not a childhood accident. It is a maintained condition. And maintained conditions require someone who wants them maintained. Mystery 13. Homer's IQ of 55. The show's creator, Matt Groening, stated in an interview that Homer Simpson has an IQ of 55. 55. An IQ of 55 places a person in the range of moderate intellectual disability. It is a score that, in a real person, would typically require ongoing support services, accommodation at work, and significant assistance with complex daily tasks. Homer holds a job at a nuclear facility. He drives a car. He raises 3 children. He manages, however chaotically, a household, a mortgage, a marriage, and an active social life. He is, by the show's own admission, one of the most cognitively impaired adults in Springfield, and he is also the person standing between the reactor core and the town. But here's the thing about an IQ of 55. It represents Homer's current cognitive capacity, with the crayon in place. The crayon is actively suppressing a brain that, when freed of that suppression, functions at something approaching genius level. Homer is not naturally a person with severe cognitive limitations. Homer is a person with artificially suppressed cognitive function, who has been living as though his suppressed state is his natural one. The mystery is the gap. The gap between who Homer is with the crayon and who Homer would be without it. Because that gap is enormous. Enormous enough that when the crayon is removed, Homer becomes a different person almost immediately. And the question of who decided Homer should live permanently on the wrong side of that gap is one the show never fully answers. Mystery 14. The deal between Grandpa Simpson and Mr. Burns. The show reveals at one point that Abe Simpson, Homer's father, struck a deal with Mr. Burns. Burns had committed some form of wrongdoing that Grandpa discovered. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would have permanent employment at the plant, regardless of his performance. Regardless of his errors, regardless of how many documented mistakes he accumulated, and the show at one point puts that number at 742, Homer would never be permanently dismissed. This deal explains something that has puzzled viewers for years. Why Burns, a man who fires people for the smallest perceived slight, has kept Homer employed across decades of spectacular incompetence. Homer's job security is not cartoon convenience. It is a contractual obligation born from a secret between 2 old men, one of whom is still alive and still running the plant that Homer technically oversees. The mystery is what Burns actually did. What was the crime that Grandpa discovered? The show implies it without specifying it, which is either a deliberate narrative choice or an opportunity the writers never fully developed. But the crime was serious enough that Burns, a man who has committed extraordinary acts of civic destruction with apparent impunity, felt the need to buy Grandpa's silence with a guaranteed job for his son. That suggests the crime was something even Burns did not want publicly associated with his name. And given what we already know about the plant's history, the skeletons in the basement, the safety violations, the deliberate contamination of the water supply, the fact that Burns felt additional exposure was worth a price says something very dark about what that something was. Mystery 15. The mother who was erased. For 6 full seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson told Homer that his mother had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up with the understanding that he was a boy whose mother had died and whose father was too cold and too distant to fill the space she left behind. That belief shaped everything about Homer. His desperate need for approval, his clinging attachment to Marge, his terror of abandonment, his willingness to absorb extraordinary amounts of disrespect and mistreatment from Burns rather than risk losing the stability of his job and his family. And then in the 7th season, the show revealed that the grave Abe showed Homer was not his mother's grave. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been showing his grieving son a famous writer's headstone as evidence of his mother's death. Homer's mother, Mona Simpson, was alive, had been alive the entire time, had not died, had not chosen to leave, had been forced underground by the actions of Mr. Burns and kept away from her family for 27 years. The mystery of why Abe lied, why he looked at his young son and chose the cruelty of a false death over the truth of a forced absence, is one the show circles, but never fully resolves. The most charitable reading is that Abe believed a dead mother was easier for a child to process than an absent one. The less charitable reading is that Abe had made his own deal with silence, his own accommodation to Burns's power, and covering up Mona's flight was part of that accommodation. Mystery 16. Mona Simpson and the Biological Weapons Lab? The story of Mona Simpson's disappearance involves a revelation that the show drops almost casually and then never fully explores. Mr. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant, he owned a biological weapons laboratory in Springfield, a facility designed to produce weaponized pathogens, operating in the same town where Homer was growing up, where children played, where families lived their daily lives without any knowledge of what was being manufactured a few miles away. Mona Simpson joined a group of activists who targeted Burns's germ warfare facility in 1969. They broke in, destroyed the biological agents stored inside, and fled. During the escape, Mona stopped to help someone who had fallen. That someone was Burns himself. He saw her face, he identified her to the FBI, and from that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive who could not go home to her son. The mystery that the show never addresses is the scale of what Burns was doing. A biological weapons laboratory in an American town during the Cold War era is not a small operation. It is a facility with federal connections, significant infrastructure, and the kind of government relationships that would make it extremely difficult to expose. Burns did not just own a nuclear plant with safety violations. Burns was producing weapons in Springfield, and the residents of Springfield had no idea. The germ lab is gone destroyed by Mona and her group, but Burns survived its destruction without apparent consequence. No charges, no federal investigation, no public exposure of what he had been manufacturing. The lab was erased almost as completely as Mona herself. Mystery 17. Burns pursued Mona for 27 years. Burns did not simply identify Mona to the FBI and move on. He maintained an active personal interest in finding her for 27 years. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in the 7th season episode, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He spots her through a cab window and calls the authorities. The FBI shows up at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. A man holding a personal grudge against a woman for 27 years because she destroyed his weapons lab is not the behavior of someone with healthy proportions between cause and effect. Burns is one of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the country. He has faced far more significant threats to his empire and interests. The biological weapons lab was not his primary source of income or power. Its destruction did not meaningfully harm him. And yet he remembered Mona's face for 3 decades. He maintained whatever relationship with federal law enforcement allowed him to trigger her pursuit. He kept the vendetta alive long after any rational calculation would have let it go. The mystery is why. What did Mona's act mean to Burns beyond the financial loss of the lab? Was it about control, about the unacceptable fact that someone had successfully defied him? Was it personal? Was there something about the biological weapons program that made its exposure uniquely threatening to Burns in ways the show does not reveal? Whatever the reason, Burns's pursuit of Mona Simpson is one of the most sustained and personal acts of vindictiveness the show depicts. And the cost of that vindictiveness was not paid by Mona alone. It was paid by Homer, who grew up without a mother, by Abe, who raised a son while carrying a lie, by the entire Simpson family, bent and shaped by a wound inflicted not by chance or fate, but by one man's refusal to let go of a grudge. Mystery 18. Homer's survival rate. Homer Simpson has been shot, electrocuted, fallen off cliffs, been struck by cars at speed, survived explosions, been mauled by animals, crushed under heavy objects, exposed to extreme temperatures, and subjected to physical trauma that would kill a normal human being many times over. He always recovers. Completely. Without lasting physical consequences. This is presented as cartoon logic, and in a straightforward reading of the show, that is exactly what it is. The resilience of animated characters is a standard feature of the medium. Homer survives because the story needs him to survive. But within the framework of the radiation theory we explored in Section 1, Homer's physical resilience is not just a narrative convention. It is a symptom. His body has been exposed to radiation from the plant since before he was born. Marge worked at the plant. Homer has worked at the plant his entire adult life. His children were born in Springfield and have never left it for any meaningful period. If radiation exposure at the levels suggested by the plant's violations is causing biological mutations throughout Springfield and Blinky, the fish is evidence that it is then Homer's body may have been altered in ways that include an abnormal capacity for physical recovery. The same mutation that gave Blinky a third eye may have given Homer the biological resilience of something that is not quite human anymore. The mystery is whether Homer's survival rate is a coincidence, a cartoon convention, or something that makes biological sense within the logic of what Springfield has been doing to its residents for 30 years. Mystery 19. The moment Homer chose to not understand. We discussed the crayon being put back in. But there is a detail of that scene that deserves more attention. When Homer has the crayon removed and his intelligence increases, he does not slowly come to the decision to return to his previous state. He makes it relatively quickly, after spending a short period at a higher cognitive level and finding that period deeply painful. The pain is not physical. The pain is existential. Being smart in Springfield means being aware of things that the rest of Springfield is not aware of. It means seeing the plant for what it is, seeing Burns for who he is, seeing the systems operating around the town, and understanding how those systems work against everyone living inside them. Homer sees all of this and cannot find a way to be happy with that knowledge. The people he loves most, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, are happier in the fog than they would be in clarity. The world of Springfield functions, after a fashion, as long as everyone agrees not to look too closely at its foundations. Homer chooses the fog because the fog is where his family lives, and he would rather be with them in ignorance than alone in understanding. This is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the show's history. Homer is not making a foolish choice. He is making a rational one, given everything available to him. But the fact that the choice is rational makes it more disturbing, not less. Because a person should not have to choose between intelligence and belonging. A person should not live in a world where knowing the truth means losing everyone you love. Springfield has made that the only available choice, and Homer has made it again and again every day since the crayon went back in. Mystery 20. What Homer would have been. The episode in which the crayon is removed shows you something the show rarely allows itself to show. It shows you the person Homer could have been. He is thoughtful. He is creative. He makes connections that others miss. He is genuinely capable of understanding complex systems and articulating that understanding clearly. He is, in the fullest sense of the word, an intelligent adult human being who has things to say worth hearing. And then the episode takes that away. The crayon goes back in, and Homer returns to the version of himself that Springfield has built, the fumbling, lovable, cognitively diminished man who will spend the rest of his life in Sector 7G without ever fully understanding what he lost. But here's the mystery. The lost version of Homer is not entirely gone. He surfaces occasionally. In moments of stress or crisis, Homer will do something remarkable, make a connection he should not be able to make, solve a problem that should be beyond him, display a kind of practical intelligence that does not fit his established IQ, The show treats these moments as jokes, as Homer accidentally being smart, but they might be something else. They might be glimpses of the person the crayon suppressed, breaking through the fog for a moment before the fog closes back in. The mystery of who Homer Simpson actually is beneath the damage, beneath the radiation, beneath the crayon and the years of diminished capacity is one the show has visited and then deliberately looked away from. Because if you really sat with that question, if you really looked at who Homer was supposed to be and what was done to him, the show stops being a comedy about a funny father who loves donuts and becomes something much harder to watch. Number. Section 3. Mysteries 21 through 30. The Coma Theory and Springfield's Broken Reality. There is a theory about The Simpsons that has been circulating since the early days of the internet and has never been fully answered by the people who make the show. Not because they have not tried. They have tried. But the theory is constructed in such a way that dismissal only seems to confirm it. The theory begins on April 1st, 1993. Mystery 21. The Beer Can and What Followed. Season 4, Episode 18. The episode is called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. Bart plays a series of escalating April Fool's Day pranks on Homer, culminating in a genuinely alarming act. Bart takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens the can, the resulting explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. So far, this is standard Simpsons chaos. But at the hospital, while Homer is recovering in his bed, he sees a vending machine across the room. He tries to get a candy bar. The machine tips over, lands on him, and puts him into a coma. A real, clinically defined, sustained coma. He flatlines. He enters an unconscious state that lasts for 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer waking up. Bart cries at his bedside and confesses that the April Fool's prank was his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately starts strangling his son, and the family laughs. Everything goes back to normal. But the episode also tells you, in its final moments, that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5% permanently destroyed, gone. And Homer's response to learning he has lost a meaningful portion of his brain forever is to laugh while also saying he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody in the room finds it medically alarming, and the show continues for 32 more years as if nothing of consequence occurred. Unless Homer never actually woke up. Mystery 22. Everything changed after Season 4. The coma theory, originally proposed by an internet user whose name has become somewhat legendary in Simpsons fan communities, rests on a single observable fact. The Simpsons is a fundamentally different show after the coma episode than it was before. Before the coma episode, the show is grounded in recognizable domestic reality. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers the nature of her marriage. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher. Bart faces genuine academic consequences. The problems are the problems of real families: money, relationships, grades, belonging. The show is satirical but rooted. After the coma episode, the show becomes something else entirely. Homer goes to space, Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster, Homer forms a vigilante group, joins a secret society, discovers his mother was a fugitive radical, and meets God on 2 separate occasions. The show transforms from a domestic comedy grounded in economic anxiety into a show where the main character has held hundreds of different jobs, traveled to dozens of countries, befriended celebrities from every field, and survived physical trauma that would end a normal human life 10 times over. The internet has been arguing about when The Simpsons got weird or got bad, depending on who you ask, for 20 years. The coma theory argues that this debate is misframed. The show did not get weird. Homer's brain got worse. The escalating absurdity is not the writers losing control of the tone. It is the systematic deterioration of an unconscious man's dream. Mystery 23. God told Homer his time was coming. 6 months before the coma episode, in the Season 4 premiere titled Homer the Heretic, Homer has a direct face-to-face conversation with God. An actual, canonical, on-screen theological dialogue with the divine. During that conversation, God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. His time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The coma theory reads this as a prophecy. God was not making a vague theological observation. God was telling Homer that his conscious waking life was nearly finished. That what came next would be something different, not death, but a kind of suspended existence where the questions of meaning and purpose would play out in a dream rather than in the world. The timeline is precise. God's prediction. 6 months of regular life. Then the beer can. Then the vending machine. Then the coma. The show presents the divine conversation in Homer the Heretic as a quirky joke about a man who would rather sleep in on Sundays than go to church. Under the coma theory, it is a harbinger. Homer's face-to-face with God is the last meaningful divine interaction he has while he is genuinely conscious, and God's parting words to him are a gentle warning that the waking life is ending. Mystery 24. Nobody in the Dream Ages? The coma theory offers what might be the most elegant explanation for the single most discussed feature of The Simpsons, the fact that nobody ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have remained in their mid-30s across 4 decades of cultural change. The show's characters are frozen in time, living perpetually in the present tense while the world around them updates and evolves. Every other theory struggles with this. The radiation theory proposes that biological mutation has arrested the aging process at the cellular level, which is creative but requires significant biological speculation. The cartoon logic explanation simply says this is how long-running animated shows work, which is true but unsatisfying as an explanation within the show's own world. The coma theory answers the question with devastating simplicity. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who fell unconscious in April 1993. Homer's brain cannot age his children because it has not witnessed them aging. The last time Homer saw Bart, Bart was 10. The last time Homer saw Lisa, Lisa was 8. The last time Homer looked at Maggie, Maggie was 1 year old. His unconscious mind cannot create versions of his children that are older than the versions it last knew. It can only generate the family it remembers, preserved at exactly the ages and exactly the dispositions they had on the day the vending machine fell. Of course, Bart is still 10. He will always be 10 inside this dream because Homer's brain has nothing else to draw from. Mystery 25. The celebrity flood in later seasons? One of the most frequently noted shifts in The Simpsons after its golden era is the dramatic increase in celebrity guest appearances. The early seasons had occasional famous faces, but later seasons became flooded with them: actors, musicians, athletes, politicians, all showing up in Springfield with remarkable regularity. The in-universe explanation for this, that Springfield somehow attracts an unusual number of famous people, becomes increasingly strained as the volume of appearances grows. The coma theory has a different explanation. Homer is lying in a hospital bed. The television in his room is on. Visitors come and go. Nurses talk. The radio plays. From within his unconscious state, Homer's brain is receiving fragments of external stimulation, names it hears, voices from the television, faces glimpsed through barely opened eyes during brief moments of semi-awareness. His dreaming mind takes these fragments and incorporates them into the simulation it is running. A name heard from the television becomes a guest character. A voice from a news broadcast becomes a Springfield resident. The celebrity appearances in later seasons are not evidence of Springfield's cultural magnetism. They are evidence of Homer's brain absorbing ambient stimuli from his hospital environment and weaving them into the dream, filling in the world of Springfield with whatever sounds and references are available in the room where his body lies. The more famous the person, the more likely their name would appear in the media environment around a hospital in Springfield. And the more prominent the media environment around Homer's hospital bed, the more celebrities appear in the dream. The flood of celebrity appearances is not bad writing. It is Homer's deteriorating brain doing its best to populate a world from whatever material it can find. Mystery 26. The tonal collapse explained? If you watch The Simpsons in order, really watch it, from season 1 through the later seasons without the comfortable distance of nostalgia, you notice something beyond the celebrity appearances. The show's internal logic becomes progressively less coherent. The consequences of events become less durable. Characters contradict established history more frequently. The laws that govern Springfield's reality become more flexible, more malleable, more willing to be broken for a joke without explanation. This is often called flanderization, the process by which characters lose their complexity and become exaggerated versions of their defining traits. But flanderization is a character-level phenomenon. What happens to The Simpsons over time is structural. The world itself becomes less stable. Under the coma theory, this makes perfect sense. A dreaming brain does not maintain perfect fidelity to the world it is simulating. It degrades over time. Details that were crisp and specific in early sleep become fuzzy and contradictory as the dream extends. Characters who had clear internal logic in the early stages of sleep begin to behave in ways that do not fully align with who they were established to be. The structural incoherence of later Simpsons is not a reflection of writers who stopped caring. It is a reflection of a brain that is slowly losing its capacity to maintain a consistent simulation. The dream is not collapsing, but it is softening. The edges are blurring. And the world Homer is dreaming about is becoming, with each passing season, a little less like the world he left and a little more like the product of a mind that has been unconscious for a very long time. Mystery 27. What the show did when it found out you knew. The writers of The Simpsons are aware of the coma theory. They have been aware of it for many years, and their response to it is one of the more fascinating pieces of evidence in the theory's favor. In season 34, an episode includes a deliberately crafted, fake deleted scene apparently leaked, apparently authentic, in which Homer wakes up from a long coma and acknowledges that everything that happened was a dream. The fake scene plays as though it is genuine archival footage. It depicts convincingly the revelation that the coma theory has always predicted. The show then reveals that the scene was planted by hackers. It was not real. It was a hoax. Homer is not in a coma. The official position of the show is that Homer woke up in April 1993 and has been genuinely awake ever since. But think about what it means that the writers created that scene. They animated it, they wrote dialogue for it, they staged it as though it was a real revelation, they put it into the world as though it was confirmation of the theory, and then they said it was fake. The writers showed you the truth and then told you it was a joke, which is, when you think about it, exactly what the coma theory predicts they would do. A show that is running on a dying man's dream cannot confirm that it is running on a dying man's dream, because confirming it would mean ending it. So it gestures at the truth and then pulls back. It shows you the exit and then locks the door. The hoax scene is not a refutation of the coma theory. It is a very strange kind of confirmation. Mystery 28. Al Jean's denial and what he did not address? Executive producer Al Jean addressed the coma theory directly in a public interview in 2015. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not address the God conversation from Homer the heretic. He did not explain why the show has become progressively more surreal with each passing season, which is exactly what you would expect from a dream generated by a brain in long-term deterioration. He said it was not true. The interviewer moved on. The mystery is not whether Al Jean was lying. He almost certainly was not lying. The show is not officially a coma story. The writers did not collectively decide to make every episode since season 4 the dream of an unconscious man. But the theory is not about authorial intent. The theory is about what the evidence shows within the show itself. And the evidence, the aging freeze, the tonal shift, the structural incoherence, the celebrity flood, the God conversation, the 5% brain loss does not disappear because a producer says it was not intentional. The pattern is there, whether anyone intended it or not. And Al Jean's denial, however sincere, did not account for the pattern. It just asked you to stop looking at it. Mystery 29. The reset button as dream logic. In almost every episode of The Simpsons, the events of that episode do not carry forward into the next one. Springfield is destroyed. Next episode, Springfield is fine. A character discovers something life-changing. Next episode, they have no memory of it. A relationship is fundamentally altered. This is called the reset button, and it is one of the most common criticisms of the show's later run. Nothing matters because the consequences never stick. But dream logic does not sustain consequences. In a dream, you can fall off a building and land unharmed and continue dreaming as though the fall never happened. You can have a conversation with a dead person and then encounter them again in the next scene, fully alive. You can experience something catastrophic and wake up the next morning with no residual effect. Dreams reset. They do not maintain narrative continuity the way waking experience does. If you were dreaming for 32 years, and within that dream you experienced hundreds of adventures and catastrophes and revelations, none of those experiences would leave durable marks. Each new dream cycle would begin fresh. The reset button is not lazy writing within the coma theory. It is the fundamental behavior of a dreaming mind that does not have the mechanisms for sustained narrative consequence that waking life possesses. Springfield resets because dreams reset, because Homer's brain does not have the architecture to maintain a world that accumulates and changes and grows the way a real world does. It can only play the same loop, slightly differently, in an endless cycling of the same family in the same house on the same street. Mystery 30. If the theory is true, what the show actually is? The coma theory does something to The Simpsons that no other reading of the show accomplishes. It transforms every episode from comedy into something more complex. If Homer has been dreaming since April 1993, then the emotional core of every episode since is not comedy. It is longing. It is a dying man's desperate attempt to preserve the people he loves at exactly the moment he left them, to hold his family in amber while his body fades in a hospital room somewhere in Springfield. Every time Homer hugs Bart, every time he tells Marge he loves her, every time he dances with Lisa in the kitchen or watches Maggie sleep. In the coma reading, these are not scenes from a comedy. They are the dreams of a man who may never wake up, reaching for the people he cannot reach in the waking world. The show will never confirm this. The economics of television do not allow for that kind of confirmation. But the theory is true enough within the evidence of the show that it changes the texture of every episode it touches. You watch Homer fall asleep on the couch and you think, maybe this is all he has ever been. A man on a couch, a man in a coma, a man dreaming about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. And every Sunday night for 36 years we have been his dream. Number Section 4. Mysteries 31 through 40 Who Really Shot Mr. Burns? The Full Case. Before we go any further into Springfield's darker mysteries, we need to spend some time with the single most famous, unsolved question the show has ever posed. And it is unsolved, despite what the show told you. Despite what Season 7 Episode 1 concluded, despite what Mr. Burns himself reportedly said from his hospital bed, the case is not closed. The case was never closed. The case was simply shut, which, in Springfield, as we have been learning, is a very different thing. Mystery 31. Everything Burns did to deserve it. To understand who shot Mr. Burns, you first need to understand who Mr. Burns was in the months leading up to the shooting. Because the shooting did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at the end of a sustained campaign of destruction that Burns had waged against nearly every person in Springfield simultaneously. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary School. The school had been using the revenue from that well to fund programs, music, art, activities for students who had nothing else. Burns took it. The school lost everything. Children lost opportunities they would never recover. He used the resulting financial pressure to drive Moe's Tavern into bankruptcy. Moe's Tavern is not just a bar in Springfield. For Homer, Barney, and the rest of the regulars, it is the primary social institution of their adult lives. Burns did not just close a business. He dismantled a community. He created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle. Elderly residents who had no other options, including Grandpa Simpson, lost their home. He fired Smithers, his loyal assistant of decades, when Smithers raised a moral objection. He injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. And then, for his final act, Burns built a massive mechanical disc and used it to block out the sun over Springfield. He literally stole the sunlight from the town so that every resident would be forced to buy their electricity exclusively from his plant. By the time Burns walked into the town meeting on the night of the shooting, every single person in Springfield had a personal, specific, legitimate grievance against him. The show took time establishing these grievances. It gave almost every major character a clear, documented motive for wanting Burns dead. And then someone shot him. Mystery 32. The clue that the victim said was meaningless, Burns staggers to the town's sundial after being shot. He falls. His hands land on two specific letters, W and S. Or, from his perspective as he looks down at them, M and S. The show tells us that M and S stands for Maggie Simpson. Burns's hands, in their final moments before he lost consciousness, spelled out his attacker's initials. Mystery solved. Except Burns himself, when he eventually identifies his shooter in the hospital, explicitly states that his hands pointing at those letters was not intentional. He did not deliberately position himself on the sundial to leave a clue, he just fell. The most prominent piece of physical evidence in the entire mystery, the central piece of evidence that the episode uses to justify its conclusion, was described by the victim himself as accidental. A piece of evidence that its creator says was not intentional cannot also be a deliberate clue. These two things are mutually exclusive. Either Burns arranged his hands to spell out initials, in which case it was intentional and meaningful, or he fell randomly as he claims, in which case the letters are coincidence and the evidence points nowhere. The show chose the second option and then used the resulting pattern as its primary evidence, which means the biggest clue in the biggest mystery in Simpsons history is, by the show's own account, meaningless. Mystery 33. The gun that was already missing. Burns carried a gun in a holster on the night of the town meeting. Shortly before the shooting, the holster is shown to be empty. The gun was already missing from his person before the attack. This is an extremely significant detail that the show provides and then does not fully explore. Whoever shot Burns used Burns's own weapon, not a gun they brought to the meeting, not a gun they owned or obtained separately. Burns's gun. This constrains the shooter considerably. They needed either to have taken the gun from Burns before the shooting, which would require proximity and dexterity, or to have encountered the gun after Burns had lost it somehow, which aligns with the scenario the show offers of a gun falling in a struggle and being picked up. But it also tells us something about who did not shoot Burns. Anyone at the town meeting who was already carrying a weapon could not have shot Burns with Burns's gun. They had their own weapons. They did not need his. The shooter is someone who was not planning violence that night, someone who encountered the gun by chance, someone for whom the shooting was impulsive rather than premeditated. A baby finding a dropped gun fits this profile. So do many other characters in Springfield who were present that night without their own weapons. Mystery 34. Burns said, "Oh, it's you." Before he was shot, Burns spoke 4 words to his attacker. "Oh, it's you." Not, "Who are you?" Not, "What do you want?" Not any form of surprise or alarm. Burns saw the person who was about to shoot him and recognized them. He greeted them the way you would greet someone familiar with mild acknowledgement rather than alarm. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has Burns ever had a meaningful interaction with Maggie that would make him respond to her presence with the casual familiarity of, "Oh, it's you"? The show does not establish a prior relationship between Burns and Maggie. Burns barely recognizes Homer, a man who has worked directly for him for years. The idea that Burns would immediately and calmly recognize an infant he has had minimal contact with and greet her presence in the parking lot with weary familiarity rather than surprise does not track with how the character has been established. The words, "Oh, it's you," suggest someone Burns knows, someone he has encountered before in a context that made an impression on him, someone whose presence in his vicinity would be unexpected but not alarming. That is not a description of Maggie Simpson. That is a description of many other people in Springfield, including people with whom Burns has a complex and historically charged relationship. Mystery 35. Homer's Season 18 Confession. In the 18th season of The Simpsons, Homer Simpson, on camera, states that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He just says it, out loud, in a regular episode. Nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. Nobody opens the case. Homer Simpson confesses to the attempted murder of the wealthiest and most powerful man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line with no consequences. This is either Homer lying for attention, which is consistent with his character and happens regularly, or it is the show acknowledging obliquely that the verdict against Maggie was wrong. If Homer did it, then the DNA evidence that pointed to a Simpson was accurate in the way it was not initially intended to be. A Simpson did it, just the wrong one. And the investigation that produced the Maggie conclusion either missed something fundamental or was redirected, whether by incompetence or design, away from the obvious suspect who had the clearest motive of anyone in town. The confession in Season 18 is almost certainly meant as a joke, but it sits in the canon, unreacted to and uninvestigated, and it does not go away just because the show moved on. Homer said he did it. Nobody called him on it. And in a town where the truth is routinely criminalized when it is inconvenient, the absence of a reaction might be exactly the reaction the truth deserves. Mystery 36. The Marge Theory. The most compelling alternate theory about who shot Burns does not involve Homer at all. It involves Marge. Marge Simpson, at the time of the shooting, had watched Burns destroy her children's school, endanger her family's dog, and steal sunlight from her town. Burns had also, in an earlier episode, developed an obsession with Marge, specifically an infatuation that was deeply unwelcome, and that Marge had to navigate carefully given Burns's power over Homer's employment. The theory argues that Marge was the shooter, and that Burns identified her but chose not to name her, not because he was confused, but because he was protecting her. His infatuation with Marge was the reason he could not bring himself to send her to prison, even after she had put a bullet in him. When Burns woke up in the hospital and named his shooter, he pointed at the sundial. He let the town draw its own conclusions from letters that, as he admitted, were not intentional. He offered Maggie's name when pressed. And Maggie, who cannot be prosecuted, who cannot be convicted, who cannot understand the weight of what she is being accused of, became the perfect vessel for an accusation that Burns would not make against the woman he had once loved. The show partially confirms this reading in its staging. The final shot of the episode shows Maggie alone in the room. She looks around. She mimics the action of firing a gun with her pacifier. This is offered as confirmation that Maggie did it. But it can equally be read as a baby who witnessed the shooting mimicking something she saw an adult do. Infants copy what they observe. Maggie watched someone fire a gun. She is reenacting what she saw. That is not a confession. That is a 1-year-old processing a traumatic event the only way a 1-year-old can. Mystery 37. The contest that nobody won. When Who Shot Mr. Burns? First aired in 1995, Fox organized a national contest inviting viewers to submit their guesses for the shooter's identity. The prize was significant. The winner would be animated into a future episode of the show. Thousands of entries were submitted. According to the DVD commentary for the episode, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of entries guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The prize was awarded via random selection to someone who also had not identified the correct answer, and they received a cash payment instead of being animated into the show. The writers acknowledged on commentary that they were aware of one person who had posted the correct answer on a Simpsons news group on the night of the original broadcast. But this person was using a college internet account that was no longer active when the producers tried to contact them. They issued an open invitation for this person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what this means. The show promoted a national contest, told the public the mystery was solvable from the available clues, and then when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody had figured it out. Either the clues were genuinely insufficient to lead a reasonable viewer to the answer, or the clues were designed to mislead, or the answer did not logically follow from the evidence in the way the show claimed it did. The one person who correctly identified Maggie as the shooter was either extraordinarily lucky or possessed information about the show's internal development. And the fact that this person has never come forward even after being publicly invited to do so is its own small mystery embedded within the larger one. Mystery 38. The alternate endings that were fully produced. The show did not just consider multiple shooters as abstract possibilities during development. It produced alternate endings. A complete alternate conclusion was written, voiced, and animated in which Smithers is revealed as the person who shot Burns. Full length, fully realized, entirely complete. This ending was shown in a clip show episode hosted by the character Troy McClure, who dismisses it by explaining that all the DNA evidence pointing to a Simpson would have to be ignored, which, he notes, would be completely unreasonable. That joke is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which was ongoing at the time the episode was written. A jury in a high-profile case had, in the real world, ignored DNA evidence to reach a verdict. The show's writers were aware of this, and they wrote a character dismissing the alternate ending by saying that ignoring DNA evidence would be absurd. The joke works because the audience knows that ignoring DNA evidence is not absurd at all. It happens. Juries do it. Courts allow it. Evidence gets misinterpreted, dismissed, or simply outweighed by other factors. The show is telling you through Troy McClure's dismissal that the official answer is not necessarily the correct one, that the evidence can be arranged to support whatever conclusion the people in power want it to support, that Maggie is the answer not because the evidence demands it, but because Maggie is convenient. Smithers was a real answer. Barney Gumble was a real answer. Homer was a real answer. The writers cycled through multiple genuine possibilities before landing on Maggie, and they landed on Maggie not because the evidence pointed exclusively to her, but because a baby as the shooter was the most absurdly perfect conclusion for a show that had been building to an absurdly perfect moment all summer. The mystery was reverse-engineered. The clues were adjusted to fit the answer after the answer was chosen. And the answer was chosen because it was funny, and because a baby cannot be convicted, and because no one in Springfield would ever look at Maggie Simpson and think she was capable of anything more dangerous than a cheerful mispronunciation. That is, of course, exactly what the rest of this script will argue she is. Mystery 39. Chief Wiggum's investigation and its convenient failures. Chief Clancy Wiggum is not a competent police officer. This is established early in the show and maintained throughout. He is lazy, self-interested, easily confused, and frequently more interested in food than in law enforcement. His investigation into the Burns shooting is a masterclass in procedural inadequacy. Suspects are eliminated through questionable means. Smithers confesses but is cleared when his alibi, he was blackout drunk and shot someone else in a completely different location, turns out to be more compelling than his initial self-incrimination. Other suspects are cleared through musical numbers and alibi witnesses of varying credibility. The investigation eventually narrows to Homer because of DNA evidence, an eyelash on Burns' suit that belongs to a Simpson. This evidence is compelling. It places a member of the Simpson family in direct physical contact with Burns at or near the time of the shooting. But the investigation never seriously pursues the question of which Simpson. The eyelash points to a Simpson. The investigation concludes that the Simpson in question was the infant, not the adult male Simpson who had the strongest documented motive, whose fingerprints were also on the gun, who had been driven to a documented breaking point by Burns' inability to remember his name after years of employment. The investigation skips from a Simpson did it to the baby did it with a speed that suggests either extraordinary competence in narrowing the field or a convenient willingness to accept the simplest possible answer that closes the case with the minimum amount of follow-up work. Wiggum is many things, but extraordinary competence in detective work is not among them, which makes the convenient convergence of evidence on Maggie, the one suspect who cannot be charged, tried, or punished, feel less like a solved mystery and more like a managed outcome. Mystery 40. The last honest look at the case. Here's what the Burns shooting evidence actually establishes, stripped of the show's conclusion. A Simpson's DNA is present on Burns. The gun used to shoot Burns was Burns' own, taken from him before or during the encounter. Burns recognized his shooter before being shot. Burns' testimony about the sundial clue being unintentional removes the initials as meaningful evidence. These facts are consistent with Maggie shooting Burns. They are also consistent with Homer shooting Burns and being present with Maggie at the scene. They are consistent with Marge shooting Burns while Maggie was present. They are consistent with several other scenarios the show does not explore. The case against Maggie is not impossible. It is possible, but it is also not proven. It is not airtight. It rests on testimony from a man who just woke up from a coma, physical evidence that establishes a Simpson was present but not which Simpson, and a behavioral observation from the final scene that can be interpreted in more than one way. In a real courtroom, the case against Maggie would not get past a preliminary hearing. In Springfield, it ended with a shrug and a joke about Texas juries. The greatest mystery in Simpsons history was not solved. It was declared solved by a police department that needed it to be solved, witnessed by a town that needed to move on, and attributed to a defendant who could not deny the accusation and would not remember it by morning. Springfield called it closed. The evidence never agreed. Number. Section 5. Mysteries 41 through 50. Mr. Burns. Immortality, age, and the dark history of a man who should not still be here. Mystery 41. How old is Mr. Burns? Actually, the show has never given a definitive answer to this question, and the reason it has never given one is that any definitive answer would be too alarming to treat as comedy. Burns's age has been stated, implied, and contradicted across dozens of episodes. Various versions of his timeline place his birth somewhere in the late 1800s. He references personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He speaks about events from the 19-teens as first-hand experience. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the most liberal reading of the show's various statements about his past, he could be approaching 140. The mystery is not just how he has lived this long. The mystery is that the show keeps giving you evidence of his extraordinary age across dozens of episodes and simultaneously expects you to accept him as a realistic character operating within the normal rules of human biology. Burns is either the oldest surviving human being in recorded history, or the show has been casually depicting something that should be scientifically impossible without acknowledging that it is doing so. The answer, as we will explore across the next several mysteries, is that Burns has found a way around the normal rules. Not through magic, through money, medicine, and a willingness to do whatever it takes to keep the machinery running. Mystery 42. The Three Stooges Syndrome. In one of the most famous scenes in the show's history, Mr. Burns visits a doctor who delivers a remarkable diagnosis. Burns has every disease known to medical science, every single one present simultaneously in his body. The doctor explains that these diseases exist in a state of perfect biological equilibrium, each one canceling out the others, none of them able to make significant progress, because every disease is being blocked by every other disease, trying to occupy the same biological space at the same time. The doctor calls it Three Stooges Syndrome, comparing it to the comic bit where three people all try to fit through a doorway at once and none of them can get through. The scene is played for laughs. It is one of the show's most quoted moments, but within the radiation theory, it makes a specific kind of terrible sense. Burns's body is not maintaining this equilibrium through any natural immune function. His body is a system under constant external management. The weekly radiation treatments do not just keep him alive in a general sense. They maintain the precise chemical and biological balance that holds every disease in stasis. The treatments are the equivalent of control rods in a nuclear reactor. They are not generating energy. They are managing the system, preventing any single element from gaining enough dominance to destroy everything else. Remove the treatments, and the equilibrium collapses. Every disease surges simultaneously, and Burns, who is simultaneously the sickest man alive and arguably the most biologically persistent, dies within the week. Mystery 43. Smithers as a life support system. Wayland Smithers is Mr. Burns's personal assistant, and the show depicts their relationship primarily as a study in loyalty and unrequited devotion. Smithers loves Burns. Burns barely registers Smithers' humanity. The dynamic has been mined for comedy and occasional pathos across the show's entire run. But within the radiation and immortality framework, Smithers is something else entirely. He is Burns's life support system. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. Smithers ensures Burns makes every weekly medical appointment with perfect consistency. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that borders on obsessive. When Burns is incapacitated, Smithers is the person who manages the treatments, tracks the protocols, and ensures the system that keeps Burns alive continues to function. The show has established multiple times that if Smithers were removed from his position, fired, ill, absent for any significant period, Burns would become helpless. The framing is always emotional. Burns needs Smithers because he is incompetent at basic tasks without him. But the deeper reading is medical. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. And a missed dose means the equilibrium breaks down. The diseases surge. And Burns, who has been alive for over a century, through the sheer force of managed medical intervention, dies within days. Smithers' devotion is not simply emotional loyalty to an employer he loves. It is the knowledge, conscious or not, that his presence is the thing standing between Burns and death. Smithers is not just an assistant. He is the single most important piece of infrastructure in Burns's entire life extension system. And Burns has never once, in any episode, fully acknowledged what Smithers is doing for him. Mystery 44. The $1 trillion bill. During World War II, the United States government entrusted a $1 trillion bill to Mr. Burns as part of a wartime financial operation. Burns was supposed to deliver the bill to Europe as part of the Marshall Plan. He kept it. He hid a $1 trillion bill, a bill so large that no individual person has the legitimate authority to retain it. A bill that represents a significant fraction of the national economy for decades. And when its existence becomes relevant in a later episode, Burns loses it through a series of comic mishaps. The mystery here is not the comedy of a man losing $1 trillion. The mystery is what Burns's possession of that bill for decades says about his relationship with the United States government. Burns stole from the federal government during a war. He stole not a small amount, but a sum of money so large it could reshape entire economies. And the consequence of this theft over the decades that followed, across all the decades in which Burns built and maintained his empire, appears to have been approximately nothing. Either the government never discovered the theft, which seems unlikely given the scale, or the government discovered it and chose not to pursue Burns, which implies a relationship between Burns and federal power that goes well beyond normal wealthy donor influence. Or Burns's connections to wartime government operations were deep enough that exposing his theft would expose things the government wanted less to expose than the money. The trillion-dollar bill is treated as a comedy set piece. Within the larger picture of Burns's extraordinary longevity and apparent immunity from consequence, it is something more. Evidence that Burns has been operating outside the normal accountability structures of American law for a very long time. Mystery 45. Burns in World War II. Burns served during World War II. This is established, and the show depicts various aspects of his wartime service, including the fact that his role was, as the show carefully phrases it, morally questionable at best. The specifics of Burns's wartime conduct are left vague enough that the show can reference them for comedy without having to commit to exactly how bad they were. But the pattern of those references suggests a man who used the war as an opportunity for personal enrichment, who allied himself with whoever was most advantageous at any given moment, and who emerged from the conflict with his wealth significantly expanded and his moral reputation considerably murkier. The mystery is what exactly Burns did during the war that the show cannot quite bring itself to state directly. The hints are dark enough that the imagination fills in something worse than what any comedy show could actually depict. And the fact that Burns emerged from the war not just unscathed but enhanced, wealthier, more connected, more deeply embedded in the infrastructure of American power suggests that whatever he did it successfully. A man who survives and profits from a global war while doing morally questionable things is a man who has learned something fundamental about how the world works. Burns spent that learning well. For the next 80 years, he applied it in Springfield. Mystery 46. The Burns Family Dynasty. The show has depicted the Burns family tree as one of the oldest and most consistently powerful lineages in American history. The Burns wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The family's control of significant resources and institutions extends back centuries, through generations of accumulation and strategic consolidation. This raises a question that the show never directly addresses. If Burns has extended his life through radiation treatments and experimental medicine, what did previous members of the Burns dynasty use? What kept them going? How does a family maintain unbroken control over significant wealth and power across centuries without the kinds of generational disruption that dismember most dynastic fortunes? The possibilities range from the mundane extraordinary luck and competent succession planning to something much darker. If the Burns family has always found methods to extend the life and capacity of its current patriarch, if there is some tradition of life extension within the dynasty that predates modern medicine, then Charles Montgomery Burns is not an anomaly. He is the most recent iteration of a very old pattern. The radiation treatments keep the current Burns alive. What kept his ancestors alive? The show does not say. But the continuity of the dynasty, the unbroken thread of Burns' power across American history, suggests that the answer might be as dark as everything else connected to that family name. Mystery 47. Burns's relationship with death. Burns has been closer to dying than almost any other character in the show. He has been shot, he has been hospitalized dozens of times. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been poisoned, been left in the wilderness. He has flatlined. He has been given last rites by at least one priest, and every single time he comes back. Not through cartoon resilience, the way Homer survives things. Homer's survival is passive. The story needs him to survive, so the story keeps him alive. Burns's survival is active. It is managed. It is the product of an entire system of people, resources, and protocols dedicated to ensuring that no matter what happens to his physical body, there will always be someone standing by with the infrastructure to bring him back. Burns is too expensive to die. That is not a metaphor. Burns has spent his entire fortune building a system whose primary purpose is his own survival. Every doctor he has retained, every pharmaceutical company he has funded, every politician whose silence he has purchased, it all serves the same goal. Keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the diseases balanced. The mystery of Burns's relationship with death is not really about his biological resilience. It is about what it means to be wealthy enough to construct a personal infrastructure against mortality. Most people die because their bodies fail and they have no recourse. Burns has recourse. Burns has resources so vast that the normal relationship between aging and death, the relationship that governs every other human life, does not apply to him in quite the same way. He is not immortal. He simply has a system in place that has successfully managed every threat to his life so far. The system is the miracle, not the man. Mystery 48. What happens to Springfield if Burns dies? This is the mystery that locks everything in place. The Springfield economy depends on the nuclear power plant. The plant is Burns's. If Burns dies without a successor who maintains the plant's operations, Springfield's primary economic institution collapses. Every business in town that depends on plant employees spending their paychecks, every supplier, every contractor, every secondary institution that exists because the plant generates economic activity in the region, all of it is downstream of the plant. All of it disappears if the plant closes. Springfield cannot challenge Burns. Springfield cannot expose the violations, the contamination, the decades of deliberate poisoning, because exposing Burns means ending the plant. Ending the plant means ending the economy. And ending the economy means ending Springfield. This is the trap. This is why nobody has ever successfully brought Burns to account for anything significant. It is not that the truth is hidden. It is that the truth, if acted upon, destroys the town that would benefit most from its exposure. Burns has built his survival not just in the medical sense, the weekly treatments, the managed diseases, but in the economic sense. Springfield cannot let him die because Springfield cannot survive his death. He has made himself structurally necessary to a population that would otherwise have every reason to take him down. That is not just power. That is genius. Twisted, predatory genius that has destroyed thousands of lives. But genius nonetheless. Mystery 49. The medical infrastructure Burns has that nobody else does. Burns has access to medical treatments and pharmaceutical interventions that do not exist for anyone else in Springfield. The weekly radiation regimen that sustains him is not something that Springfield General Hospital offers as a standard service. It is a custom protocol developed specifically for his physiology, administered by specialists whose entire professional lives are organized around keeping one man alive. The ordinary residents of Springfield, meanwhile, receive medical care from an institution that is often depicted as underfunded, understaffed, and operating with equipment that should have been replaced decades ago. Springfield General is not a cutting-edge medical facility. It is a hospital that does its best with what it has. Burns has his own private medical infrastructure. Burns has experimental treatments. Burns has specialists who understand his condition with a precision that no general practitioner could approach. The mystery is what happened to the people in Springfield who developed conditions related to radiation exposure, who developed cancers, neurological damage, immune system dysfunction from years of living downwind of the plant, and sought treatment at Springfield General. Did those people receive the same quality of care that Burns has access to? Did the institution Burns effectively controls through his economic influence over Springfield develop the same sophisticated understanding of radiation-related illness that Burns's private physicians possess? The answer, almost certainly, is no. Burns's medical infrastructure is not available to the people his plant is harming. The knowledge accumulated by his physicians' knowledge about what radiation does to biological systems, knowledge that was generated specifically because Burns needed to manage his own radiation exposure, has not been shared with the population most affected by that exposure. Burns has the cure, or at least the management strategy, for what he is doing to Springfield, and he has kept it entirely to himself. Mystery 50. Burns will never face consequences, and Springfield has accepted this. Across 36 years and 788 episodes, Charles Montgomery Burns has committed an extraordinary catalog of offenses against the town of Springfield and its residents. Environmental contamination, economic manipulation, political corruption, the deliberate employment of incompetent safety personnel to maintain a dangerous facility, the pursuit of a private vendetta that destroyed one family across 3 generations, the theft of federal property, the operation of a biological weapons laboratory in a residential area, the literal blocking of the sun. The consequences Burns has faced for all of this, across all of this time, are negligible. He has been inconvenienced. He has been briefly humiliated. He has occasionally lost something he values temporarily. He has never faced a sustained accountability of the kind that would genuinely alter his position in Springfield. And the mystery is not why Burns escapes accountability. The mechanisms of his escape are clear enough: money, influence, the economic dependence of the population, the cognitive damage that prevents most Springfield residents from sustaining organized opposition. The mystery is what it means that a show has depicted all of this, clearly and for decades, without ever allowing consequence to catch up with the character. The Simpsons is showing you something about power, about what it looks like when someone has accumulated enough of it, about the ways that wealth and influence and structural necessity combine to create a situation where accountability becomes not impossible exactly, but perpetually deferred, always about to arrive, never quite getting there. Burns will never face consequences because Springfield has decided that the cost of imposing them is too high. And Springfield will keep making that decision, episode after episode, season after season, in the permanent present of a town that will not let itself change. Number. Section 6. Mysteries 51 through 60 Marge, Lisa, and the women holding Springfield together. Mystery 51. Marge's hair and what it contains. Marge Simpson's hair is one of the most iconic visual elements in television history. It rises approximately 2 feet above her head in a towering blue beehive that has maintained its exact shape and dimensions for 36 years without the application of visible product, without the support of visible structure, without any mechanism that would explain how a woman's hair can function as a load-bearing architectural element. The show has used Marge's hair as a storage unit on multiple occasions. Objects are hidden inside it, secrets are kept there. The hair is not just a style choice, it is a container, a vault, a personal space that Marge maintains as the one place in her life that is entirely under her own control. The mystery of Marge's hair is not structural, it is psychological. Why does a woman who lives in a household of extraordinary chaos, who manages a husband whose needs are frequently overwhelming, whose children require constant emotional triage, who has herself at various points struggled with anxiety, addiction, and the specific loneliness of being the competent person in a room full of people who depend on her competence? Why does this woman maintain a hairstyle that requires significant daily effort and that has not changed in over 3 decades? The hair is continuity. It is the one fixed thing in a life of constant flux. Everything around Marge can collapse and reset and change. Homer will make another mistake, the house will be endangered again, some new crisis will arrive by the next episode, but the hair will be exactly as it was. The hair is Marge's anchor. It is the visible evidence that she is still herself, still present, still choosing how she appears to the world even when she has very little choice about anything else. Mystery 52. Marge's anxiety and what caused it. The show has depicted Marge Simpson as a woman with significant anxiety. This is treated with varying levels of seriousness across the series. Sometimes it is played for laughs, sometimes the show gives it genuine emotional weight. But the origin of Marge's anxiety is rarely examined directly. What does it mean to be the most competent person in a household where your husband's incapacity requires constant management? What does it mean to have grown up in Springfield, to have breathed the same air and drunk the same water as every other resident, and to have emerged with the cognitive function that Marge clearly possesses intact, capable, emotionally intelligent while watching the people around her function at a fraction of that capacity? Marge's anxiety might be adaptive. In an environment where nothing is certain, where catastrophe arrives without warning and the reset button is always waiting to wipe out whatever she has managed to build, sustained anxiety is a reasonable response. It is the appropriate emotional register for someone who understands, at some level, that the stability of her family depends almost entirely on her ability to maintain it. The mystery is whether Marge has ever been allowed to put that weight down. Whether there has ever been an episode, a moment, a space in which Marge Simpson was not the person holding everything together and could simply exist without the particular exhaustion of being the one who cannot afford to fail. The show visits this question occasionally. It never answers it fully. Mystery 53. The time Marge nearly left. There are episodes in which Marge comes very close to leaving Homer. The show has circled this possibility repeatedly across its run, examining what it would mean for Marge to step away from the marriage to choose herself over the obligation of maintaining the household. Every time, she stays. Every time, the episode ends with the marriage intact and the status quo restored. The mystery is not whether Marge loves Homer. She does. The evidence of that love is present in almost every episode. The mystery is what it costs her to keep making the choice to stay, because the choice is not passive. It is not just the default continuation of an existing situation. It is an active decision, made repeatedly, to accept a life that requires an extraordinary level of her personal investment in exchange for a level of reciprocity that is, by any objective measure, significantly lower than what she contributes. Homer loves Marge, that is also clear. but Homer's love is often expressed in the absence of the kind of sustained attention and effort that Marge brings to the marriage. He forgets. He prioritizes short-term comfort over long-term care. He makes decisions that affect the entire family without consultation and then expects Marge to manage the consequences. And Marge manages them, every time. Because in Springfield, Marge is the one who manages. And the mystery is whether she has ever been given the opportunity to find out who she might be if managing were not her primary function. Mystery 54. Lisa's isolation and what it says about Springfield? Lisa Simpson is, by any measure, one of the most intelligent characters in the show. She is a gifted musician, a passionate activist, a sophisticated thinker whose moral seriousness and intellectual depth are depicted consistently across decades of episodes. She is also profoundly lonely. Lisa has very few genuine peer relationships in Springfield. Her classmates do not understand her. Her community does not value what she values. Her family, though loving, lacks the intellectual and emotional register that would make her feel truly seen. Even within the family that loves her, Lisa exists in a kind of permanent isolation, surrounded by people who care about her deeply but who cannot quite follow where her mind wants to go. The mystery is what Springfield is doing to Lisa by keeping her there. Because Lisa's intelligence and moral conviction are precisely the traits that the town is least equipped to support and most invested in discouraging. Springfield does not reward insight. Springfield rewards compliance. Lisa refuses to comply. Springfield punishes her for it, not through dramatic persecution but through the quiet, grinding erosion of having every effort at engagement met with indifference. What would Lisa become if she were allowed to leave Springfield for good? The show has glimpsed future versions of Lisa, older, accomplished, still fighting, but always brings her back to 8 years old and back to Springfield. The floating timeline will not let her leave. The mystery of Lisa is not who she is. It is who she would be if the loop ever stopped and she was allowed to grow. Mystery 55. Lisa's Buddhism and what it means in Springfield. Lisa converts to Buddhism in a season 13 episode, and the conversion is handled with unusual respect for a mainstream animated sitcom. The show takes her spiritual development seriously, depicts her finding genuine meaning in Buddhist practice, and allows her to maintain that conversion without later walking it back. But Buddhism in Springfield, a town defined by excess consumption, short-term thinking, and the systematic avoidance of self-knowledge, is a radical act. The first precept of Buddhist practice is an orientation toward clear seeing, looking at the nature of things as they actually are, rather than as we wish they were. In Springfield, clear seeing is essentially criminal. The town has voted, repeatedly and explicitly, to maintain comfortable fictions over uncomfortable truths. The town's social contract requires that you not look too closely, not ask the wrong questions, not follow observations to their logical conclusions. Lisa, as a practicing Buddhist, is committed to doing exactly what Springfield most needs its residents not to do. She is committed to seeing clearly. The mystery is whether this makes her Springfield's most dangerous resident, not because she intends harm, but because a person genuinely committed to clear seeing in a town built on systematic denial is, by definition, an existential threat to the town's operating system. Mystery 56. What Marge knows about the plant. Marge worked at the Springfield nuclear power plant briefly in an episode that is typically remembered for its workplace comedy elements. But the mystery lives in what Marge learned during that employment and what she chose to do with that knowledge afterward. Marge is not cognitively impaired. Whatever radiation exposure she has experienced, her reasoning capacity appears largely intact. She is observant, analytically capable, and aware of the gap between how things appear in Springfield and how they actually function. During her time at the plant, she was in the same environment as Homer. She saw the facility from the inside. She experienced the culture of a workplace that has 342 safety violations and knows it. She encountered the systems and practices that Homer has been normalized to accept as routine. And then she left the plant, went home, and has spent every episode since managing the household of the man who continues to work there. The mystery is what Marge knows, what she has concluded over years of observation about what the plant is doing to her family and her town, whether she has connected the dots that the show is so careful to lay out without allowing its characters to connect, and whether her decision to stay in Springfield to keep the family there, to raise her children in the shadow of those towers, is made in full awareness of what those towers represent. Marge is smart enough to know. The question is whether she has let herself know. And if she has, what that knowledge costs her every time she sends Homer off to work. Mystery 57. The saxophone as Lisa's only language. Lisa plays the saxophone with a level of skill and emotional depth that is remarkable for an 8-year-old, and the show has consistently used her music as the most direct expression of her inner life. When Lisa cannot say what she feels, she plays it. When the world around her becomes too overwhelming, the saxophone is the space where she can tell the truth. The mystery is why music is safer for Lisa than words. Why a girl who is fluent and articulate and capable of sophisticated argument chooses, repeatedly, to express the things that matter most to her through an instrument rather than through language. The answer might be that Springfield does not listen to Lisa's words. The show depicts this again and again. Lisa speaks, makes a good argument, presents evidence, makes a case, and is dismissed. The dismissal is so consistent that it has become part of the texture of her relationship with Springfield. But music is harder to dismiss. You cannot argue with a saxophone. You cannot tell a melody it is wrong. When Lisa plays something true, the people around her feel it even when they would reject it if she said it. Music gets past the defenses that Springfield has built against uncomfortable truth. And so Lisa plays night after night in her room above Severgreen Terrace, telling the truth in the only language Springfield cannot quite shut out. Mystery 58. Marge's mother and the prejudice she never examined. Marge's mother, Jacqueline Bouvier, is one of the show's more interesting secondary characters, and the mystery surrounding her is about what she chose to pass on to her daughter and what she chose to keep. Jacqueline has certain fixed ideas about what Marge's life should look like and what kind of person Marge should be. These ideas were formed in a specific cultural context post-war American domesticity, a particular vision of femininity and family structure, and have not substantially updated in the decades since. The mystery is what Marge inherited from Jacqueline that she has not examined. The ways in which Marge's sense of what she should be patient, maintaining, self-effacing, organized around the needs of others, might be less her own authentic preferences and more the accumulated weight of her mother's expectations operating invisibly within her. The show does not spend much time on this. It is more interested in the comedy of Jacqueline's judgment than in the psychology of intergenerational transmission. But the question of how much of Marge's extraordinary patience is chosen and how much is simply what she was taught to be is one of the more interesting mysteries the show has implanted without ever choosing to excavate. Mystery 59. The marriage that should have broken and didn't. Homer and Marge's marriage has survived things that would end most relationships. Financial ruin, recurring physical disasters, external temptations, fundamental incompatibilities of personality and aspiration, and the specific strain of living in Springfield, which seems designed to stress test every relationship it contains. The mystery is not that they love each other. The mystery is the mechanism by which that love has been sufficient to hold the marriage together through decades of genuine difficulty. The show's answer, across various episodes, is that Homer and Marge have something that transcends their obvious differences, a belief in each other that is not always earned by the evidence but persists anyway. Homer believes Marge is extraordinary. Marge believes Homer is capable of being better than he usually is. These beliefs are not always supported by what either of them does in any given episode, but they function as the foundation beneath everything else. But there is a darker reading. The darker reading is that Marge stays because Springfield has not given her a realistic alternative. Her economic dependence on Homer, the needs of her children, the specific culture of Springfield, which does not particularly encourage women to build independent lives, have created a situation where leaving, however justified it might be, is not practically available to her. The mystery is which of these readings is more true. The show prefers the romantic one, the realistic one is harder to look at. Mystery 60. Why Lisa is staying in Springfield. Given everything the show has established about Lisa, her intelligence, her ambition, her moral seriousness, her awareness that Springfield is not a hospitable environment for people like her, why is she still there? The obvious answer is the floating timeline. Lisa stays in Springfield because the show's structure requires that she stay in Springfield. She is 8 years old and will always be 8 years old, and the town will never let her go, because letting her go means allowing the story to progress in ways it cannot. But within the logic of the show's own world, there is a more interesting answer. Lisa stays because her family is there. Because despite everything Springfield has failed to give her, the people she loves most are rooted in it. And Lisa, for all her idealism and restlessness and profound sense of not belonging, is also a girl who loves her family with the kind of uncomplicated intensity that makes leaving feel like amputation. The mystery is what it costs her. What years of staying in a place that does not fit you, that actively resists the kind of person you are trying to become, does to the person you eventually become. And whether the version of Lisa that the show glimpses in its flash-forward episodes accomplished, still fighting, still alone, is a triumph or a tragedy? Both, probably. Both. Number. Section 7. Mysteries 61 through 70. Bart, Maggie, and the Silent Genius Theory. Mystery 61. What Bart was supposed to become? Early plans for The Simpsons positioned Bart as the show's central character. The early promotional material, the early merchandise, the general cultural framing of the show in its first seasons all pointed to Bart as the protagonist. He was the breakout. He was the cultural phenomenon. He was the character that made Simpsons fever a real thing in the early 1990s. And then, quietly, without any dramatic announcement, the show shifted. Homer became the protagonist. Bart remained important, but the gravity of the show moved away from him and settled on his father. The mystery is whether this shift reflected something the writers discovered about the show's emotional possibilities, or something they discovered about Bart's limitations. Because Bart as a character has a ceiling. His rebellion is entertaining. His relationship with authority is consistently funny. His bond with Homer is one of the show's most reliable sources of genuine emotion. But Bart does not grow. He cannot grow. The floating timeline does not allow it. And more fundamentally, the show has never seemed quite sure what Bart is growing toward. He is the rebellious child without a clear picture of the adult the rebellion is building toward. He is the beginning of a story whose middle sections are perpetually deferred. The mystery of what Bart was supposed to become before the show decided to not let anyone become anything is one of the more poignant, unanswered questions in Springfield's history. Mystery 62. Bart and Homer's relationship. Honestly examined, Homer strangles Bart. Repeatedly, enthusiastically, in nearly every episode. This is presented as comedy, the frustrated father's instinctive response to his incorrigible son, and audiences have laughed at it for 36 years. When you sit with it longer, the humor becomes more complicated. Homer's physical aggression toward Bart is consistent and normalized. Bart accepts it as part of the relationship. The rest of the family does not intervene. Springfield's culture does not register it as a problem. The strangling is part of the texture of the Simpson household, as regular and predictable as Homer's donut consumption. The mystery is what this relationship looks like from Bart's perspective. Not from the comedy perspective the show offers the exasperated dad, the mischievous kid, but from the perspective of a 10-year-old boy whose father's primary response to conflict is physical. What does it mean to grow up in a household where a parent's love and a parent's frustration are both expressed through the same gesture? What does it teach you about the relationship between love and violence? The show has touched on this occasionally, in episodes that examine the Homer-Bart relationship with unusual seriousness. The most famous is a Season 4 episode in which Homer, realizing he has never told Bart he is proud of him, makes a sustained effort to connect with his son. The episode is frequently cited as one of the show's finest moments. But then the next episode airs and the strangling resumes, and the mystery of what Bart has learned about love from the only man in his life who is supposed to model it remains unresolved. Mystery 63. Maggie has been watching everything. Maggie Simpson does not speak. She does not walk reliably. She communicates through pacifier sounds, facial expressions, and the occasional pointed gesture. She is, by every external measure, a typical infant who has not yet developed the capacities that would allow her to participate meaningfully in the world around her. She has been this infant for 36 years. The mystery is not what she lacks. The mystery is what she has gained from 36 years of being exactly the person that everyone around her decides not to pay attention to. Maggie has watched every argument in the Simpson household. She has witnessed every crisis, every resolution, every moment of genuine connection between her family members, and every moment of genuine damage. She has observed Burns's machinations, Springfield's social dynamics, the gap between how things appear and how they actually function. She has watched all of this from a position of perfect invisibility. Because nobody monitors an infant with any sustained analytical attention. Nobody speaks carefully around a baby. Nobody edits themselves or performs a version of themselves for a 1-year-old. The infant in the room sees everyone as they actually are. Maggie has had 36 years of that vantage point, and she has never said a word. Mystery 64. The Daycare Rebellion. The theatrical short, The Longest Daycare, released in 2012 and nominated for an Academy Award, depicts Maggie at a daycare facility where she encounters a caterpillar about to become a butterfly. Another infant, a bully named Gerald, wants to destroy it. Maggie wants to protect it. What follows is 7 minutes of Maggie executing a series of multi-step plans against an adversary and an institutional system that are both larger and more powerful than she is. She reads the environment. She identifies threats and resources. She develops strategies, adapts them when they fail, and ultimately succeeds in protecting the butterfly and releasing it outside the facility. She does all of this without speaking, without walking reliably, without any of the physical capacities that adults use to navigate the world. She succeeds because her decision-making is better than everyone else's. Every choice she makes in the short is the correct choice. Every adaptation is timely and appropriate. Her assessment of other characters' behavior is accurate enough that she can predict what they will do before they do it and position herself accordingly. This is not infant behavior. This is strategic planning of a sophistication that most adults do not consistently achieve, and Maggie does it before she can form a sentence. The mystery is not whether Maggie is extraordinarily intelligent. The short film demonstrates that she is. The mystery is why nobody in her family or community has noticed, and whether the absence of notice is accidental or, from Maggie's perspective, deliberately engineered. Mystery 65. The Intelligence Test Results. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence on multiple occasions. The results vary by episode. The show is not consistent about establishing a specific number, but the pattern across those tests is consistent. Maggie's cognitive scores are extraordinary, off the charts, beyond what standardized testing can accommodate. The show plays these revelations as quick jokes and moves on. A baby who tests at genius level is funny. The joke is made, the scene ends, the episode continues, and Maggie goes back to being the baby who does not speak and falls over when she walks. But the test results do not disappear just because the episode moves on. They are canonical. Maggie has been demonstrated, within the show's own logic, to possess intelligence that places her among the most cognitively capable individuals ever tested. And the family's response to this information is to effectively not act on it. No special education, no enriched environment, no recognition that their youngest child is operating at a level that requires specific support. Maggie is placed in a daycare facility with a bully who tries to hurt caterpillars, and the family goes about their business. The mystery of the intelligence test results is not what they show about Maggie. It is what the family's non-response shows about Springfield's relationship with extraordinary capability. In a town where intelligence is not rewarded, where Lisa's brilliance has earned her nothing but isolation and frustration, perhaps the rational choice is to not draw attention to a gifted child. Perhaps not acting on the test results is the most protective thing the family can do for Maggie. Or perhaps the family simply does not know what to do with a baby who tests smarter than everyone they have ever met. Mystery 66. What Maggie learned from watching Lisa. Lisa Simpson is brilliant, and her brilliance is visible. She announces it, she defends it. She insists on being taken seriously as an intelligent person, and she encounters, in response to that insistence, a consistent pattern of dismissal, mockery, and resistance from the community around her. Maggie has watched this happen since the day she was born. She has watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive nothing but resistance. She has watched the most intellectually capable member of the family be consistently undervalued by a household and a community that reward compliance over intelligence. And Maggie has drawn a lesson from this observation. Not the lesson Lisa draws, which is to keep fighting regardless of the cost. Maggie has drawn the opposite lesson. Silence is protection. Invisibility is a strategic advantage. The less the world notices you, the more you can accomplish without interference. Every time Maggie does something remarkable in the show, what happens? The family fails to notice. The community fails to notice. The investigation into Burns's shooting focused on everyone except the baby, because who suspects an infant? The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act, every display of intelligence, every moment where Maggie changes the outcome of a situation, it happens below the radar. In the margins. In the spaces where nobody is looking, and Maggie has ensured that nobody looks at her by maintaining the most effective disguise available to her. She performs exactly what everyone expects a baby to perform. Passive, quiet, dependent, helpless. None of these are true, but they are enormously useful. Mystery 67. The pacifier motion that was not a confession. After Burns is identified and the investigation concludes, there is a final scene in the hospital room. Everyone has left. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, confirming that no one is watching her, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confirmation. Maggie did it. She knows what she did. She is, in the privacy of an empty room, reenacting her crime. But the behavior the show depicts, the careful check to ensure no one is watching, followed by the mimicking gesture, can be read in two very different ways. In the first reading, it is a confession. Maggie is alone and safe, and she allows herself a moment of acknowledgement of what she did. The trigger motion is self-directed. It is the private admission of guilt that she cannot make publicly. In the second reading, it is witness memory. Maggie watched someone shoot Burns. She is reenacting what she saw someone else do. The careful check of her surroundings before performing the gesture is not the caution of a perpetrator. It is the caution of a witness who observed something frightening and is processing it in the only way available to her through mimicry, the way all infants process the behavior they observe in the world around them. Which reading is correct depends on what actually happened in that parking lot. And as we have explored, the actual events of that parking lot remain genuinely uncertain. Mystery 68. Bart's alternate future lives. The show has depicted several alternate futures for Bart Simpson, and they are strikingly varied. In different futures, Bart has been a successful lawyer, a failed deadbeat, an entirely different kind of person depending entirely on which choices branch from which moment in his 10-year-old life. The mystery of Bart's alternate futures is what they say about the nature of identity in the show's universe. Most characters in Springfield have a fixed identity, they are who they are, and the floating timeline preserves them in that identity indefinitely. But Bart's futures are unusually plastic. He seems, more than any other character, capable of becoming radically different things depending on the circumstances. This might be because Bart is 10. He is at the age when the branches are still open, when the person he will become is still genuinely undetermined. The floating timeline has frozen him at exactly the age when he is most malleable, most capable of becoming something other than what he currently is. Which means Springfield has frozen Bart at precisely the moment when he has the most to lose from being frozen. He is permanently at the age of maximum potential, and the town will not let him reach any of it. Mystery 69. Maggie and the radiation theory? Within the framework of the radiation theory explored in Section 1, Maggie Simpson represents a specific and remarkable possibility. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates biological mutations, and if those mutations affect different individuals differently based on their genetics, their exposure history, and factors that cannot be predicted in advance, then Maggie's extraordinary intelligence might be the specific form her mutation has taken. Homer's mutation, if the radiation theory is correct, reduced his cognitive function to the point of clinical disability. Maggie's mutation, operating on a different genetic substrate and different neurological architecture, supercharged her cognitive function to levels that standard testing cannot measure. Same environmental cause, same contaminated water and irradiated air, same family, living in the same house under the same towers. But where the father's brain was diminished, the daughter's was amplified. Where one side of the radioactive coin produces impairment, the other produces something extraordinary. Homer and Maggie are the two extremes of what nuclear contamination can do to human cognition. He is what happens when it takes something away. She is what happens when it gives something back in a form that was never supposed to exist. Mystery 70. What Maggie is waiting for. This is the final and largest mystery of the Simpson family's youngest member. Maggie is extraordinarily capable. Maggie is strategically committed to invisibility. Maggie has been watching, learning, cataloging the world around her for 36 years from a position of perfect unnoticeability. What is she waiting for? The show has never answered this question, because the show has never been willing to let Maggie grow up and take the action that all of this watching and waiting seems to be preparing her for. The floating timeline will not permit it. She will remain 1 year old and silent and watchful until the show ends. however long after this particular night that happens to be. But if you take the evidence at face value, if you accept that Maggie is as intelligent as the show has repeatedly demonstrated, that her silence is strategic rather than developmental, that her invisibility is chosen rather than imposed, then the question of what she is waiting for is not rhetorical. It is the most important unresolved question in Springfield. Because a person this capable, this patient, this committed to strategic invisibility does not simply exist. She is preparing for something. She has been preparing for a very long time. And whatever she is preparing for will arrive in a moment when nobody sees it coming. Nobody will see it coming because that is exactly how Maggie designed it. Section 8. Mysteries 71 through 80 Springfield's geography, predictions, and the town that exists everywhere and nowhere. Mystery 71. Where is Springfield? Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can name Springfield than can name the capital of a significant number of actual American states. And yet Springfield does not exist on any map, will not appear in any atlas, and cannot be located within the continental United States by any combination of geographic evidence the show has provided. Springfield has oceanfront property and mountain ranges and deserts and active volcanoes, all within a reasonable driving distance of its center. No real American town has this combination of features. You cannot have an ocean, a mountain range, a desert, and a gorge all within the same county. Geography does not permit it. Springfield borders Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It has a climate that ranges from severe winter blizzards to tropical heat waves within a single season. Its zip code and area codes suggest locations that contradict each other. The state abbreviation has appeared on screen as NT, which is not a real American state designation. The show's creator, Matt Groening, admitted in a 2012 interview that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up near. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was solved. Then the show aired episodes that contradicted the Oregon location. The writers did not honor Groening's statement. They continued building geographic contradictions into the show's fabric, maintaining the ambiguity with what appears to be deliberate and sustained effort. Mystery 72. The geographical impossibility as legal shield. Here is a reading of Springfield's impossible geography that goes beyond the joke. The Springfield nuclear power plant operates in an unclear regulatory environment. If Springfield exists in a state that cannot be definitively established, then the state regulatory authority responsible for overseeing the plant cannot be definitively established either. The EPA, which in the movie treats Springfield as a containment zone, is a federal agency but state-level environmental enforcement, which would be the first line of oversight for a facility like the plant, operates through state environmental agencies. If the state cannot be determined, the responsible state agency cannot be determined. Complaints cannot be routed to the correct regulatory body. Investigations cannot be properly jurisdictionally assigned. Lawsuits face threshold questions about applicable law and venue that create procedural delays in courts that are themselves uncertain about which state's law applies. Springfield's geographic ambiguity is not just a comedy device. It is a regulatory labyrinth. A town that exists in multiple states simultaneously has no single regulatory authority. And a nuclear facility with no single regulatory authority has no single accountability mechanism. Burns's plant has floated between jurisdictions for 36 years. Every violation, every contamination event, every documented instance of regulatory non-compliance has been technically handled by a state agency that was uncertain whether it was actually the responsible party. The violations remain unfixed not just because Burns has refused to pay for repairs. They remain unfixed because the geographic ambiguity has made enforcement a jurisdictional nightmare. Springfield is everywhere and nowhere, and the plant at its center has been protected by that nowhereness since the day it opened. Mystery 73. The Trump Prediction. In the year 2000, a Simpsons episode depicted a future America in which Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States. In that same episode, Lisa's immediate predecessor in the White House is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before the 2016 presidential election. This is the most famous of the show's supposed predictions. It has generated articles, documentaries, and an ongoing cultural conversation about whether the writers knew something the rest of us did not. The show's own producers have been consistent in their answer. Al Jean's explanation is that when you produce enough content over a long enough period, some of it will align with future events through statistical probability. Producer Bill Oakley has stated that many of these coincidences have simple explanations. The writers were observing trends that were already visible and extrapolating them to logical conclusions. The Trump prediction, specifically, reflects the fact that Trump had been publicly flirting with presidential runs since the late 1980s. He was a recognizable public figure whose name was associated with extravagant wealth, media prominence, and occasional political statements. The writers looked at the trajectory of celebrity politics and wrote a joke about where it logically led. They were not predicting an outcome, they were satirizing a tendency. The fact that the tendency produced the outcome they satirized says more about the tendency than about the writer's foreknowledge. Mystery 74. The predictions that failed. The show has also made jokes that did not come true. Thousands of them. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies that never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went different directions. Jokes about technological developments that were superseded by entirely different technologies. Cultural predictions that missed entirely. Nobody screenshots these. Nobody shares the failed predictions on social media. Nobody builds conspiracy theories around the jokes that did not come true. Confirmation bias works in one direction. We remember the hits. We forget the misses. And when a show has produced nearly 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations about the trajectory of American culture, and you filter those observations so that only the accurate ones get remembered and shared, you end up with a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. The Simpsons predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of a brilliantly written show running for an impossible length of time, staffed by highly educated observers of American society, producing more satirical content than any other show in television history, and then having that content filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created, which is the internet. The show did not predict the future. The show wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to arrive, and the ones that arrived are the only ones anyone remembers. Mystery 75. The Higgs boson equation? In a 1998 episode, Homer discovers a mathematical equation on a blackboard that, when the episode was analyzed by physicists following the 2012 experimental confirmation of the Higgs boson particle, appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson with reasonable accuracy. This is the prediction that gives even skeptics pause. The Trump prediction can be explained by trend extrapolation. The smartwatch prediction can be explained by technological trajectory observation. But a mathematical equation that anticipates the mass of a subatomic particle 16 years before it was experimentally confirmed is harder to dismiss. The episode was written with the assistance of David X. Cohen, a writer who holds a graduate degree in mathematics and who incorporated legitimate mathematical content into the show's comedy. The equation Homer writes is not random gibberish. It is based on real mathematics. The mystery is whether Cohen writing a comedy episode about Homer's amateur physics in 1998 was working from theoretical frameworks that were already circulating in the physics community and that were sufficiently specific to point toward the Higgs mass. The Large Hadron Collider, which ultimately confirmed the Higgs boson, began construction in the mid-1990s. Theoretical predictions about the particle's mass were an active area of research. Cohen may have been reading the physics literature and incorporating its more accessible predictions into a comedy bit, which would make the apparent prediction not prophetic but simply current, the show accurately depicting what the physics community was already saying in terms that a general audience would not recognize as scientific content. Or it is a remarkable coincidence. The honest answer is that we cannot be certain which it is. Mystery 76. The Disney-Fox merger. In a 1998 episode, the show depicted Disney acquiring the Fox Corporation. The actual Disney-Fox merger was completed in 2019, 21 years after the joke. The show itself is a Fox production. The joke was, on one level, an act of corporate self-satire, a Fox show making a joke about Fox being consumed by a larger entertainment conglomerate. It was also an observation about the direction of media consolidation, which by the late 1990s was already an accelerating trend. The mystery of this particular prediction is what it means that it came true. Because if Disney eventually bought Fox, the network that produced The Simpsons, then every episode of The Simpsons is now a Disney property. The show that joked about being absorbed by Disney has in fact been absorbed by Disney. The writers made a joke about a future that later consumed the very vehicle through which they made the joke. That level of recursive corporate irony was not something anyone intended. But it is one of the stranger real-world coincidences connected to the show's apparent ability to anticipate the future. Mystery 77. The show as a cultural mirror. There is a theory about the Simpsons predictions that is more interesting than any individual coincidence. The theory is that the show does not predict the future. The show shapes it. The Simpsons is one of the most deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its jokes have become part of the American lexicon. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture and their own institutions. When the show depicts a Trump presidency as an obvious satirical possibility, that image enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes something people think about when they encounter Trump in other contexts. The image does not predict the future. The image makes the future feel familiar before it arrives. It normalizes the possibility. It primes the cultural imagination. When the future actually arrives, when reality catches up to the satire, it does not feel like prediction. It feels like recognition. We have seen this before. The show already did this. Springfield does not reflect America. Over 36 years, America has become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 3.5 decades, and the country stared into it for so long that it started to resemble what it saw. Mystery 78. The floating timeline and its contradictions. The floating timeline means that the show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. But Homer and Marge's backstory is anchored to a past that has to move with them. If they are in their mid-30s in 2025, they were teenagers in approximately 2005. Their formative years were defined not by the 1970s and early disco era that the original show depicted, but by MySpace and the early internet. The show has depicted this revision multiple times. Homer and Marge's origin story has been told at least 4 times, each iteration placing their formative years in a different decade. They have been grunge-era teenagers. They have been early 2000s hipsters. Their courtship music has changed. Their cultural references have updated. The mystery is what this means for the characters' identities. If your personal history is a document that gets revised every few years to maintain narrative convenience, your past is not fixed. Your memories are not stable. You are, in a fundamental sense, a different person depending on when the show is describing your childhood. Within the radiation theory, this makes a specific kind of sense. Radiation damage to the hippocampus and other memory-related structures would produce exactly this kind of memory instability, a past that cannot be reliably recalled and therefore cannot resist being rewritten. Within the coma theory, it makes a different kind of sense. Homer's dreaming brain cannot maintain a fixed personal history because the dream does not have access to perfect records. It has impressions and feelings and fragments, and it assembles those into something that works for the current moment without worrying about whether it contradicts what it assembled last time. Mystery 79. Why Springfield cannot be found? There is a reading of Springfield's geographic impossibility that goes beyond legal shields and narrative convenience. Springfield cannot be found because we are not meant to find it, not in a literal geographic sense, but in the sense of pinning it down, fixing it in place, making it specific. The moment Springfield becomes a real place, the moment it is definitively located in a specific state with a specific regulatory environment and a specific accountability structure, it becomes a place that can be addressed, remediated, held to account. An unfindable town is a town that cannot be helped. Its residents cannot be officially identified as victims of environmental contamination because the contamination cannot be officially attributed to a facility in a jurisdiction that does not clearly exist. The people of Springfield cannot petition their congressional representatives because their congressional representatives depend on knowing which congressional district Springfield is in. The geographic ambiguity protects Burns. It protects the plant, and it protects if you take the darkest reading the system that has been running Springfield for decades. Because the first step in accountability is location. Before you can hold anyone responsible for what has happened to a town, you have to be able to say with certainty where the town is. Springfield refuses to be located, and in refusing to be located, it refuses to be held accountable. The town's impossibility is its immunity. Mystery 80. The show that knows what it is. There is a meta-mystery about The Simpsons that sits above all the individual theories and all the specific mysteries. The show knows, the writers know what Springfield is. They know what the plant represents. They know what Burns's immortality means. They know about the coma theory and the radiation theory and the collective denial episode and all of it. They have read the fan discussions. They have engaged with the theories obliquely and occasionally directly. They are aware of what they have built. And they keep building it. They keep adding details that feed the theories. They keep introducing evidence that supports readings the show officially denies. They keep writing characters who behave in ways that are most coherent when viewed through the lens of the theories the show will not confirm. The meta-mystery is whether this is intentional or accidental, whether the writers are maintaining the theories as a conscious artistic project, or whether the show's accumulated weight simply produces these patterns regardless of individual intent. The honest answer is probably both. Some of it is deliberate. The Principal and the Pauper episode, which we will return to, was a specific choice to show the audience how Springfield's denial mechanism works. The God conversation before the coma was deliberate foreshadowing. But much of the rest accretes over time, the natural result of 36 years of continuous world-building around a foundation that was established with certain structural elements built in from the beginning. The show knows what it is. Whether the people who make it fully understand what they have built is a different question. And that question, the gap between what the writers intended and what the show has become, might be the most interesting mystery of all. Number. Section 9. Mysteries 81 through 90 side characters, deaths, and the hidden stories Springfield never finished telling. Mystery 81. Hans Moleman's death count? Hans Moleman is the small, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield and exists primarily to suffer. He has been hit by cars and crushed by falling objects and buried alive and eaten by animals and struck by lightning and incinerated. He has died, by conservative estimate, dozens of times in canonical episodes, not Treehouse of Horror specials, not dream sequences, but regular episodes that are meant to reflect the ongoing reality of Springfield. And then he appears again in the next episode, completely fine. No explanation offered, no resurrection scene depicted. He simply returns, ready to encounter whatever fresh catastrophe Springfield has prepared for him. The running gag interpretation is obvious. Moleman dies a lot. It's funny. The comedy derives from the repetition and the escalating variety of his deaths. But within the radiation theory, Moleman's death cycle raises a specific possibility. If nuclear contamination can produce the kind of biological resilience Homer displays, the ability to survive injuries that should be fatal, could extreme exposure produce something even more dramatic? Could Moleman represent a case of such profound biological alteration that his body has lost the ability to permanently die? That death, for Moleman, has become a temporary condition rather than a permanent one? His own stated age 31 compounds the mystery. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s. Something aged him catastrophically in a very short time. Something that did not kill him. Something that may have made killing him, in any ordinary sense, impossible. Mystery 82. Moleman's real identity. Hans Moleman has appeared under different names in different episodes. He has been called Ralph Mellish. He has been identified in various ways that do not consistently match. The show treats this inconsistency as a background joke. Moleman is a character so marginal that the show cannot even maintain a consistent name for him. But within the collective denial framework we discussed in the context of the Armin Tamzarian episode, there is a darker reading. Springfield is a town that has demonstrated its willingness to vote on the official version of a person's identity and legally mandate that everyone adopt that version. Springfield has shown that it can criminalize the true name of a person and replace it with a false one. What if Moleman's name uncertainty reflects something similar? What if Hans Moleman is not his actual identity? What if the recurring small man who dies and returns is someone Springfield has collectively agreed to know as Hans Moleman, regardless of who he actually was before whatever happened to him happened? The name Ralph Mellish appears specifically enough in the show's history that it feels like a real name rather than a joke placeholder. And if Ralph Mellish is a real person who became Hans Moleman, who was renamed, repositioned, and made into a background character, through some mechanism the show depicts, but does not explain, then Moleman's repeated deaths are not just a running gag. They are the ongoing punishment of someone Springfield has decided it does not want to fully acknowledge. Mystery 83. The Armin Tamzarian Revelation and What It Diagnosed? Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. The episode that fans have been calling the worst in the series for 28 years, and that is actually the most honest episode the show has ever aired. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Skinner's 20 years of service. A stranger appears. He identifies himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam veteran who was believed to have been killed in combat. He was not killed. He survived. He escaped captivity. He came home to find that someone else was living his life. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter named Armin Tamzarian, a former street criminal, a man who, feeling guilty about the real Skinner's apparent death, traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother Agnes and who, when Agnes mistook him for her son, simply became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the family, the identity, and lived inside them for 2 decades. The real Skinner arrives. The truth is exposed. Everyone in Springfield knows. And then they vote. They vote not on what to do with the truth, but on whether to acknowledge it. And the verdict is unanimous. Maintain the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree declaring the imposter to be the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his life stolen, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again. The fans hated this episode. Critics hated it. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner, hated it. It was called the moment the show betrayed its own continuity. But the episode is not a betrayal. It is a confession. It is the show finally saying, explicitly, what it has been showing implicitly for years. This is how Springfield works. This is the mechanism. This is what happens to uncomfortable truth in this town. It gets tied to a train and removed. Mystery 84. What happened to Armin Tamzarian? After the episode, Armin Tamzarian continues to be Principal Skinner. The show never returns to the Tamzarian reveal in any meaningful way. He is Skinner. He was always Skinner. The legal decree holds. The official version of reality is maintained, but the mystery of Armin Tamzarian does not disappear just because Springfield voted to make it disappear. Armin Tamzarian is a man who lived inside a stolen identity for 20 years, who took a name and a family and a life that did not belong to him, who, when discovered, was protected by the same community whose trust he had violated. What does that do to a person? What does it mean to know that the community around you has chosen your lie over someone else's truth? Not because the lie is preferable in any moral sense, not because the real Skinner was undeserving, but because the community found the lie more comfortable than the alternative, and because once the community committed to the lie, they needed Tamzarian to persist as Skinner to justify their own complicity in maintaining it. Tamzarian did not just steal Skinner's identity. He became, through the town's vote, the identity that Springfield needed. And the real Skinner, exiled on his train, became the identity that Springfield could not afford to acknowledge. Mystery 85. The Fat Tony Mystery. Fat Tony, Springfield's resident organized crime boss, dies in a specific episode and is immediately replaced by his cousin, who is also named Fat Tony and who is visually identical. The show plays this as a joke about the interchangeability of mob figures. One Fat Tony dies, another Fat Tony takes his place. The name is the brand. The individual is irrelevant. But within the larger pattern of Springfield's relationship with identity, the Fat Tony situation is interesting. Springfield has a crime boss because Springfield requires one. The town's social and economic infrastructure includes organized crime as a functional element crime that provides services the legitimate economy cannot or will not provide, that enforces certain kinds of order that official institutions cannot or will not enforce. When one Fat Tony dies, another one arrives immediately because the position is filled not by the individual but by the function. Springfield needs a Fat Tony the way it needs a Mayor Quimby and a Chief Wiggum and a Mr. Burns. The specific human being occupying the role is secondary to the continued functioning of the system that role serves. This mirrors, in a darkly comic way, the Tamzarian situation. Springfield doesn't need Seymour Skinner specifically. It needs a principle. It needed the function that Skinner occupied, and when the real Skinner arrived and threatened to displace Tamzarian from that function, Springfield chose the function over the person. Mystery 86. Barney Gumbel's unrealized potential. Barney Gumble is Homer's best friend and Springfield's most dedicated alcoholic. He is also, beneath the alcoholism, a person of remarkable intelligence and sensitivity who has been thoroughly destroyed by his addiction. The show has touched on Barney's intellectual capacity in ways that suggest a person who, in different circumstances, might have been extraordinary. He has moments of profound insight. He produced an experimental film that won a festival award. He speaks with a precision and awareness of his own condition that suggests someone who understands exactly what is happening to him and has chosen not to resist it. The mystery of Barney is the mystery of wasted potential, which is a theme the show returns to repeatedly in its more serious moments. Springfield is full of people who could have been something other than what they are. Burns's system, the contamination, the collective denial, the floating timeline that prevents growth, all of it conspires to keep Springfield's residents exactly where they are, frozen in the roles the town has assigned them. Barney is the drunk. He has been the drunk for 36 years. In at least one episode, he briefly achieves sobriety, and the transformation is remarkable. He becomes a helicopter pilot. He seems genuinely capable of building a different life. And then the reset button returns him to the bar. The mystery is whether Springfield could survive a version of Barney who was sober, whether the town actually needs its drunk, the way it needs its crime boss and its corrupt cop and its incompetent safety inspector, whether the drunk is a function, and whether the specific human being performing that function could ever be permitted to stop. Mystery 87. Sideshow Bob and the town that keeps releasing him. Sideshow Bob is a recurring villain who has attempted to kill Bart Simpson multiple times across the show's run. He is intelligent, cultured, theatrical, and genuinely dangerous. He has been convicted of attempted murder and has served prison sentences. He also keeps getting released, repeatedly. The prison sentences end, the parole board convenes, and Sideshow Bob, who has documented multiple attempts on the life of a child, is returned to society, where he invariably attempts to kill Bart again. The mystery is what this says about Springfield's justice system. Sideshow Bob is not a reformed criminal. His releases are not evidence of rehabilitation. They are evidence of a system that either cannot recognize its own failures or has chosen not to. Springfield's prison has processed Bob multiple times and returned him to the community in a state that is indistinguishable from the state he was in when he committed his crimes. But Springfield's prison holds everyone else. The town's justice system is perfectly functional for ordinary offenders. It is specifically dysfunctional for one recurring character who has demonstrated, consistently, that he represents a specific threat to a specific child. Within the collective denial framework, this makes sense. Springfield has agreed not to take Sideshow Bob's threat to Bart fully seriously. Not because the threat is not real, it is real. It is documented. It is repeated. But because acknowledging how serious it is would require acknowledging how badly the system has failed. And Springfield does not acknowledge systemic failure. It prefers to watch the failure repeat. Mystery 88. The clues hidden in background details. The Simpsons writing staff is famous for burying jokes in background details that viewers would have to pause and zoom in to catch. Signs, newspapers, billboards, graffiti. The show has spent 36 years hiding additional content in the margins of its scenes, content that rewards close attention and that sometimes tells a different story from the one the foreground is presenting. Some of these background details are simple jokes. Some are continuity references. But some of them, when cataloged across episodes, form patterns that suggest a layer of storytelling happening below the show's official narrative. Background newspapers occasionally contain headlines that reference events the foreground has never addressed. Signs in Springfield sometimes acknowledge things about the town's condition that no character ever says out loud. The world the show builds around its characters is, in places, more honest about Springfield than the characters themselves are. The mystery of the background details is not any single specific one, though individual details have been the subject of extensive fan analysis. The mystery is what it means that the show has spent 3 decades building a more honest version of Springfield in the margins, while maintaining a more comfortable version in the center. The foreground is Springfield as Springfield wishes to be seen. The background is Springfield as it actually is, and the gap between those two versions is where most of the show's real content lives. Mystery 89. The forgotten characters who simply disappeared. Springfield has had dozens of characters appear with apparent significance and then quietly vanish from the show, never to return without explanation. Some vanished because the voice actors became unavailable. Some vanished because the storylines that introduced them were not continued. Some vanished for reasons that the show has never explained, and the silence around their disappearance is itself a kind of answer. Within the collective denial framework, character disappearances from Springfield follow the same logic as the expulsion of the real Seymour Skinner. Springfield removes people who become problematic. It does not always do so dramatically. Sometimes it simply stops acknowledging their existence. The town forgets them. The characters who remain forget them. And because Springfield forgets things, the forgotten people stay forgotten. The mystery of the disappeared characters is whether any of them had stories that were interrupted before their logical conclusion stories about what the plant was doing to Springfield, about Burns's actual history, about the gap between the official version of events and what actually happened. Whether some of those characters vanished not because their stories were finished, but because their stories were getting too close to something the show, or something within the show's world, needed to keep buried. Mystery 90. The Show Within. The show Itchy and Scratchy. Itchy and Scratchy is the violent cartoon that Bart and Lisa watch within The Simpsons, a show within the show that presents an extreme parody of animated violence. In Itchy and Scratchy, a mouse perpetually dismembers a cat in increasingly elaborate ways. The cartoon is presented as the children's programming within Springfield, the thing Bart and Lisa watch the way real children might watch Saturday morning cartoons. The mystery of Itchy and Scratchy is not about the violence, which is clearly satirical. The mystery is what it says about Springfield's children, that this is what their media environment provides them. Bart and Lisa watch Itchy and Scratchy with genuine enthusiasm. The cartoon is not disturbing to them. It is entertainment. It is the natural background radiation of their cultural environment. Within the radiation theory, the desensitization this represents is significant. Children who grow up watching cartoon violence without distress are children whose emotional calibration is not quite standard. The same contamination that has altered their physical development may have altered their psychological responses to violence, death, and suffering. Or the simpler reading. Itchy and Scratchy is what happens when an entertainment industry responds to children's capacity for absorbing extreme content by providing increasingly extreme content. The cartoon is a mirror of its audience's desensitization, and Bart and Lisa's enjoyment of it is a reflection of what Springfield has already done to their sense of what is normal. Number. Section 10. Mysteries 91 through 100, the floating timeline. Ned Flanders and the loop we built. Mystery 91. Ned Flanders was engineered. Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is kind, generous, devoutly faithful, physically healthy, financially responsible, and a devoted father to his two sons. By any objective measure, Ned has done everything right, and Springfield has been punishing him for it since the pilot episode. The backstory of Ned's extraordinary goodness was revealed in a Season 8 episode. Ned was, as a young child, a violent and uncontrollable kid. His parents, committed beatniks who rejected conventional discipline, let the behavior continue until it became unmanageable. They brought him to a psychiatrist named Dr. Marvin Monroe, who spent years conditioning the aggression out of Ned through intensive behavioral modification. The conditioning worked almost too well. Ned's aggression was not eliminated, it was suppressed, buried under layers of behavioral programming that prevent it from surfacing under any normal circumstances. Ned's patience is not a character trait he developed. It is a cage built around the person he might have been, and it has been maintained by the conditioning for his entire adult life. The mystery of Ned Flanders is what lives inside that cage. Mystery 92. What happens when the cage breaks? The episode that reveals Ned's conditioning also shows what happens when it temporarily fails. A hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community rallies to rebuild it. They do so with such spectacular incompetence that the rebuilt house collapses almost immediately, and Ned, who has absorbed decades of suffering with unfailing grace, snaps. He screams at the town. He insults every person who has wronged him. He says things he has been holding inside for what feels like decades. Things that are true, things that are precise, things that the behavioral conditioning has been suppressing for his entire adult life. And then he is institutionalized. The show's response to Ned finally speaking his truth is to have him committed to a mental health facility. The community that failed him, when confronted with the honest articulation of how it failed him, decides that honesty is pathological. This is consistent with everything we know about Springfield's relationship with uncomfortable truth. Ned's breakdown is not a mental health crisis. It is a moment of clarity, and Springfield's response to moments of clarity is to remove them from the community. Mystery 93. Why God talks to Homer and not Ned. The show has depicted God on multiple occasions. God is a character in The Simpsons, a physical presence who has had direct conversations with Homer Simpson, who has appeared to Homer, who has engaged with Homer's life in ways that are depicted as genuine divine communication. Homer, it should be noted, is not a devout man. He skips church. He is indifferent to organized religion. His relationship with faith is casual to the point of irreverence. He has conversations with God primarily because God shows up and Homer is present, not because Homer sought the connection. Ned Flanders has dedicated his entire life to his faith. He attends church consistently. He reads scripture. He prays. He structures his behavior, his parenting, his relationships, his daily choices around the requirements of his faith. If anyone in Springfield has earned divine attention through devotion, it is Ned. God has never spoken to Ned, not in any episode the show has depicted. While Homer has had face-to-face conversations with the divine, Ned has received silence. The mystery is what this says about the show's theology. And the theology seems to be, faithfulness is not the path to divine communication. What draws God into conversation with Homer is not virtue or devotion. It is chaos, need, the desperate stumbling of a man who does not know what he is doing but somehow keeps ending up in situations that require divine input. God talks to Homer because Homer needs talking to. God is silent with Ned because Ned's cage handles everything before God's intervention becomes necessary. The devout man's faith makes the divine redundant in his life. The faithless man's chaos creates the conditions in which the divine becomes necessary. It is not a comfortable theology, but it is a consistent one. Mystery 94. Ned's forgiveness as pathology. After Homer's selfishness leads directly to the death of Ned's wife Maude, Homer dodges t-shirts from a promotional cannon at a racing event. The t-shirts hit Maude instead. Maude falls from the bleachers and dies. Ned forgives Homer. He forgives him, because that is what Ned does, because the conditioning will not let him do anything else. The mystery of Ned's forgiveness is whether it is a moral achievement or a medical symptom. Because genuine forgiveness, the kind that comes from a place of autonomy, from a deliberate choice to release justified anger, is morally significant. It is a thing a person does. But Ned cannot do anything else. His conditioning has removed the option of not forgiving. He cannot choose to hold the anger because the conditioning does not allow anger to surface in a way that could be chosen or maintained. The forgiveness is automatic. It is the programmed output of a system that was designed to produce that output regardless of input. Can you be morally credited for a choice you are incapable of not making? Can Ned's forgiveness be called grace if the alternative was never available to him? The show treats Ned's forgiveness as a source of comedy, the exasperation of watching a man forgive someone who clearly does not deserve it. But beneath the comedy is a question about the nature of virtue, when virtue is the product not of character but of behavioral engineering. Mystery 95. The saddest character on the show. The conventional answer to the question of which Simpsons character is most tragic is Homer. Homer is cognitively impaired, exploited by his employer, robbed of his potential, raised without a mother, shaped by forces he cannot see and would not understand if he could see them. But Homer is too cognitively impaired to fully comprehend his own suffering. He exists in a fog that makes the weight of his situation bearable, not because the fog diminishes the weight, but because it prevents him from fully registering it. Ned comprehends everything. Ned is not cognitively impaired. Ned sees his situation clearly. The dead wife, the destroyed house, the neighbor who will never change, the community that rewarded his goodness with incompetence, the God who fills Homer's life with divine conversation while leaving Ned's prayers unanswered. Ned sees all of it, and Ned cannot be angry about it, because the conditioning will not let him. He must be patient. He must be grateful. He must wave at Homer from the driveway with the same smile that he has worn for 36 years, processing in silence whatever it costs him to wave at the man whose selfishness killed his wife. That is the specific texture of Ned's suffering, not the suffering of someone who cannot see clearly, the suffering of someone who sees everything and cannot respond to any of it in the way a human being who had not been behaviorally conditioned would respond. Ned Flanders is the saddest character in The Simpsons. The show just keeps making him smile. Mystery 96. The loop is the show's thesis. We have now been in Springfield for many hours. We have traced the radiation from the plant through the bodies of its residents. We have followed Homer into his coma and watched the dream drift from domestic comedy to cosmic absurdity. We have reopened the Burns shooting and found the official verdict wanting. We have followed Burns through a century of engineered survival. We have watched Marge hold everything together with quiet efficiency that the show calls patience and we might call something darker. We have seen Maggie's silence for what it is, strategy, not limitation. We have found the predictions and the geography and the background details and the disappeared characters, and every single thread we have pulled has led to the same place. The loop. Springfield is in a loop. Its residents do not age. Its catastrophes do not leave marks. Its characters cannot grow. Its timeline floats perpetually in the present, holding everyone at exactly the ages and exactly the positions they occupied when the show began. The loop is the show's thesis. Everything else, the radiation, the coma, the collective denial, Burns's immortality, the geographic impossibility, the prediction phenomenon, everything else is either a cause of the loop or an expression of it. The loop is what Springfield is. The loop is why Springfield persists. Mystery 97. The flash-forwards and why they hurt. The show has depicted its characters in the future multiple times. Lisa as a young woman, Bart as an adult, the family at various ages. These flash-forwards are always presented as speculative possible futures, not definitive ones. The what-if of Springfield allowed to progress. They are also consistently emotional in a way that the show's regular episodes are not. When you watch Lisa's Wedding, the season 6 episode in which a 23-year-old Lisa is shown engaged, living in England, maintaining a complicated relationship with her family from a distance, the emotion it produces is genuine in a way that most of the show's regular comedy is not. Because in that episode, the characters are allowed to be people who have lived. They have histories that stretch beyond the episode. They have become something. They have grown. The flash-forwards hurt because they show you what the show is refusing to allow. They show you that growth is possible, that change is possible, that the characters are capable of becoming something other than what the loop has them locked into being. And then the episode ends and the loop resumes, and 8-year-old Lisa is back in Springfield, and you feel the return of the constraint more sharply than you did before the episode showed you what freedom looked like. The flash-forwards are acts of cruelty from a certain angle. They give you the ending and then take it away. Mystery 98. We built the loop? Here is the final and most uncomfortable mystery of The Simpsons. Springfield cannot change because we will not let it. The audience maintains the loop. The audience is the mechanism by which the floating timeline perpetuates itself. Every time we watch a new episode and accept the reset, accept that whatever happened last week has been erased, that Homer is fine, that Springfield is intact, that nobody has aged and nothing has changed, we are voting. The way Springfield voted in the Tamzarian episode, to maintain the comfortable version of events over the true one. We know that Bart should be in his 40s by now. We know that Lisa should have left Springfield decades ago. We know that Homer should have faced consequences for the accumulated disasters of his career. We know that the plant should have been shut down. We know all of this. And every Sunday night or whenever we queue up the next episode, we agree to not know it. We agree to find Homer stumbling through the door at 5:30 and find it funny rather than heartrending. We agree to see Maggie still sucking on the same pacifier and feel fond rather than disturbed. We agree to watch the same family in the same loop and pretend the loop is something other than a loop. We built it. We maintain it. We make it real every time we watch. Mystery 99. What it means that we cannot stop watching? The Simpsons has been running for 36 years. It has long since passed the point where any conventional quality argument could justify its continued existence. The golden years seasons 1 through 8, roughly, depending on who you ask, are 3 decades behind us. The show that currently airs is a different thing from the show that made Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie into cultural icons. And yet we watch. Or we return. Or we carry the show's references and images with us even when we have not watched in years. The Simpsons is not just a television show anymore. It is part of the structure of American cultural memory. Its references are in the language. Its characters are in the iconography. Its specific vision of American domestic life has been so thoroughly integrated into the culture that it has shaped how the culture sees itself. The mystery of why we cannot stop watching is the mystery of what the show has become to us. It is not a show anymore. It is a place. It is Springfield. And Springfield is a place you can go when you need to be somewhere familiar, somewhere that has not changed, somewhere where the same things are funny, and the same people are there, and the same couch is waiting, and the same credits play. The couch we sat on as children while watching the opening credits has changed. The room has changed. We have changed. But Springfield has not. And in a life full of change, Springfield's unchangingness is not a limitation. It is a comfort. A specific and irreplaceable comfort that nothing else in television can provide. We cannot stop watching because stopping means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older, that the world we live in is not the world in which we first encountered Homer and Marge and their impossible yellow family. That time has moved in a direction and at a speed that we did not fully notice because we were too busy watching a show where time does not move at all. Mystery 100. Why we love Springfield. After everything, after the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortality and the manipulation and the denial and the loop, after all the evidence that Springfield is a contamination zone, a dream, a managed reality, a town that has criminalized truth and expelled anyone who threatens the official narrative. After all of that, the mystery is why we love it. And the answer, when you sit with it, is simple. Because Springfield loves us back. Not in a way the show announces. Not in a way that any character expresses directly, but in the accumulated weight of 36 years of the same family sitting down together for dinner, having the same arguments, making the same mistakes, recovering from the same disasters, and ending up in the same places every single time. Homer loves Marge. He does a terrible job of showing it most of the time, but he loves her with a totality that nothing, not incompetence, not crisis, not the loop itself has ever diminished. Marge loves Homer. She loves him in the way that requires the most effort and the most ongoing decision-making, the way that is not sustained by romance or ease, but by something that goes deeper than either. Bart loves his family. He expresses it through conflict, through mischief, through the specific aggression of a boy who learned to love the same way he learned everything else badly, loudly, and with total commitment. Lisa loves everyone and is not sure any of them love her back in quite the way she needs, and she keeps loving them anyway, because Lisa is a person who does not give up on the things she loves just because they disappoint her. And Maggie. Maggie, with her enormous eyes and her strategic silence and her 36 years of watching everything from behind a pacifier. Maggie loves her family with the purity of someone who has decided that this, specifically this, is worth protecting, worth planning for, worth waiting for. The show that has been showing us contamination and comas and corruption and cover-ups has also been showing us in every episode, a family that holds together. Not because it is easy, not because they are equipped for it, not because Springfield has given them the tools they need, because they choose each other. Again and again, episode after episode, season after season, across 36 years of the same loop. That is the final mystery. Not how Springfield works, not what the plant is doing to the people inside it, not who shot Burns or how old Burns is or where Springfield is on the map. The final mystery is why a family this broken, in a town this damaged, in a loop this permanent, keeps managing to be okay, keeps finding their way home, keeps laughing at the dinner table and hugging at the door, and existing, together, in the same impossible house on Evergreen Terrace. The answer is the show. The answer is us. The answer is that we have been watching this family for so long that their love has become part of our love. Their home has become part of our home. Their loop is our loop. And we tighten it a little more every time we press play. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Let's go back to the beginning of this, because the beginning is where the show buried the most evidence and where the most casual dismissal happened. The Springfield nuclear power plant is introduced in the very first episode of the series as background, a place Homer works, a source of income for the family, a building on the horizon with two distinctive towers. It is scenery, it is prop. The writers needed Homer to have a job, and they gave him the most ironic job available. The man least suited to prevent a nuclear disaster is the man whose job it is to prevent one. But over the seasons that follow, the plant accumulates detail in a way that no mere prop accumulates detail. It becomes specific. Its violations are counted and numbered. Its infrastructure is explored in episodes that take the audience through its corridors, its control room, its basement. The show builds a picture of the plant not as shorthand for Homer's working-class life, but as a genuine institution with a genuine history and genuinely catastrophic ongoing effects on the community around it. The 342 violations are the starting point, but consider what violations at a nuclear facility actually mean in practical terms. Nuclear regulatory frameworks exist because the consequences of failure at a nuclear plant are not localized. A chemical plant that fails endangers the immediate vicinity. A nuclear plant that fails depending on the nature of the failure, the reactor type, the containment systems, the wind can endanger a region. The violations at the Springfield plant are not the violations of a facility that occasionally cuts corners on paperwork. They are the violations of a facility that has been operating in a state of sustained dangerous negligence for its entire operational history. The cracked cooling towers are the most visible evidence of this negligence, but they are far from the most significant. Cooling towers are dramatic and recognizable, and they make excellent shorthand for a dangerous facility. But the real danger in a nuclear plant is not the cooling towers. The real danger is the reactor core itself, the spent fuel storage, the waste management systems, the integrity of the containment structures. And the show drops evidence of failures in all of these areas across its run, treating each piece of evidence as a standalone joke rather than part of a cumulative indictment. Plutonium as a paperweight. This detail appears and is treated as absurdity, the idea that someone at the plant would be casual enough about radioactive material to use a rod of plutonium to hold down their papers. But plutonium is not merely radioactive in the gamma radiation sense that triggers Geiger counters and requires shielding. Plutonium is an alpha emitter, meaning its primary danger is internal exposure, ingestion, or inhalation. A person sitting at a desk with a plutonium paperweight, handling papers that have been in contact with it, breathing air near it, is being exposed to alpha radiation in ways that do not require a dramatic meltdown to cause serious biological damage. The paperweight gag is not just absurd. Within the physics of what plutonium actually does to biological tissue, it is a horror. The luminous rats deserve similar attention. Rats that glow in the dark have absorbed enough radioactive material to produce bioluminescence through irradiation of their tissue. These are not cartoon animals behaving in a cartoon way. Within the show's logic, glowing rats are biologically plausible evidence that the radioactive material in the plant has entered the food chain of the building's resident fauna. Rats move. They travel through walls, through the plant's infrastructure, into the surrounding environment. They are eaten by other animals. They die, and their remains decompose into soil. The glowing rats are not just a background gag, they are a vector. They are the mechanism by which the plant's radioactive material exits the facility and enters the broader ecosystem. The waste being dumped directly into bodies of water is perhaps the most legally significant violation the show depicts. Radioactive waste disposal is among the most heavily regulated areas of environmental law, precisely because radioactive contamination of waterways produces effects that compound over time and distance. Material that enters a river upstream eventually appears downstream. It enters sediment, where it concentrates. It enters aquatic life at every level of the food chain. It enters the people who drink the water. And the Springfield River has Blinky in it. The three-eyed fish is the show's most explicit acknowledgement that the plant's waste disposal practices have already produced detectable biological mutations in local wildlife. But Blinky is the fish that became nationally notable, the three-eyed freak that ended up in news coverage and political advertising. The show does not address how many other fish in that river have anomalies that nobody noticed because nobody was looking. The show does not address the condition of the birds that eat those fish, the bears that wade those rivers, the deer that drink from them. Blinky is the visible tip of a contamination event that the show establishes and then deliberately fails to pursue. All of this has been accumulating since the second season. All of this is canonical. All of it is in the show. And the mystery that the show presents most clearly, and that is most consistently overlooked, is not any specific violation or any specific contamination event. It is the fact that none of it has produced consequences. Not regulatory consequences. Not legal consequences, not medical consequences that are publicly acknowledged. The violations persist, the waste continues, the rats keep glowing, and Springfield keeps buying electricity from the towers on the hill. The question of what Homer Simpson might have been is one the show has answered, and then immediately closed. The crayon episode is the most direct engagement with this question, but it is not the only one. The show has returned, repeatedly and from different angles, to the theme of Homer's potential, his native intelligence, his capacity for understanding, the version of him that exists beneath the fog of chemical exposure, physical brain trauma, and decades of radiation-adjacent existence in Springfield. In the episode where Homer briefly becomes a food critic, he displays an analytical capacity and a precision of expression that surprises everyone around him. The moment is played for comedy, the idea that Homer, of all people, has a refined palate and the language to describe what he tastes. But the comedy depends on the premise that this version of Homer is real, that the capacity for careful discernment is genuinely present inside him. The joke does not work if Homer is simply faking sophistication. The joke works because Homer is not faking. The capability is authentic. It is just buried. In episodes where Homer applies himself to a task with genuine focus, where the circumstances require him to function at a higher level than his baseline, he consistently exceeds expectations. Not because he is lucky, because the intelligence is there. It has always been there. The fog is not the person. The fog is what has been done to the person. The deal between Grandpa and Burns adds another layer to this excavation of Homer's potential. Because the deal was not made in a vacuum. Burns committed a crime, and Grandpa Simpson discovered it. The crime had to be significant enough that Burns, who routinely commits crimes with apparent impunity, felt the need to purchase silence rather than simply deploy the same institutional power he uses to avoid consequences for everything else he does. The question of what that crime was is one the show raises and does not answer, but consider the timing. The deal appears to have been made around the period of Homer's childhood, around the time that Mona Simpson was being driven underground, around the time that the biological weapons lab was being destroyed, around the time that Burns's Springfield operations were experiencing their most significant period of documented challenge. Was the crime Grandpa discovered connected to Mona? Was Grandpa aware of Burns's role in driving his daughter-in-law into exile and chose silence over justice in exchange for his son's employment? Did Burns buy Grandpa's cooperation with Homer's job security at the precise moment when cooperation was most valuable, when the truth about what Burns had done to the Simpson family was closest to the surface? The show implies this without confirming it, and the implication that Grandpa Simpson participated, however reluctantly, in the system that kept Homer damaged and compliant by ensuring he would always have a job at the plant that was doing the damage, is one of the more uncomfortable threads in the show's fabric. Homer inherited the consequences of everyone else's choices. His mother chose activism and paid with her freedom. His father chose silence and paid with his honesty. Burns chose profit and paid with nothing. And Homer, standing at the center of all of it, understood none of it, could not understand it, had been made, through a combination of accident and design, into precisely the person who could not understand it. The tragedy of Homer Simpson is not that he is stupid. It is that he is not. The tragedy is the gap, the vast, unbridgeable gap between the person Homer was supposed to be and the person that Springfield's systems, Burns's power, and the crayon in his brain conspired to make him. He chose to put the crayon back, but the choice was never really free. It was the only choice available to a person who had been shaped, from childhood, to need the fog more than he needed the clarity. The mechanics of the coma theory deserve more careful attention than a simple summary provides. Because the theory is not just a clever explanation for the show's tonal shift. It is a framework that makes specific predictions about what the show should look like if it is true, and those predictions hold up remarkably well when tested against the actual episodes. A person in a long-term coma is not experiencing nothing. The brain in a comatose state is active, generating electrical signals, processing information from the environment, maintaining the biological systems that keep the body alive. And in some documented cases, coma patients report experiences that occurred during their unconscious period, fragments of awareness, dream states, narrative experiences that felt complete and real while they were happening. Homer's coma, under the theory, is not a blank period. It is an extended dream state. And the content of that dream state is generated from everything Homer's brain has available to work with: his memories, his experiences, the ambient stimuli from his hospital environment, and the deep desires of a man who, at the moment he went under, had a family he loved and a life he was not finished living. The early seasons of the dream are the most faithful to Homer's memories. The first few seasons after the coma episode are still relatively grounded. The family dynamics, the financial pressures, the neighborhood relationships are all consistent with the world Homer knew before April 1993. His brain is working from clear, recent memory. The dream is high resolution. As the years pass, as Homer's body lies in the hospital bed and the seasons change around Springfield General, the dream begins to degrade. The memories that fed the early seasons are well established, frequently revisited, richly detailed. But the brain needs new content. It cannot simply replay the same memories indefinitely. It begins to extrapolate, to improvise, to generate content from less reliable sources. Homer goes to space because Homer has seen television coverage of space missions. His brain takes that television content and inserts Homer into it, because Homer is the protagonist of his own dream, and the dream places him at the center of significant events. Homer meets celebrities because Homer has heard celebrities on the hospital room's television. Homer joins a secret society because the concept of secret societies is available somewhere in his cultural memory, and his dream can use it as raw material for a new storyline. The escalating implausibility of later seasons is not creative excess. It is cognitive degradation. The brain is further from its source material. The dream is further from memory. The simulation is running on fumes, generating content from an increasingly depleted store of reliable information, producing episodes that feel progressively less like anything that could actually happen because they are the products of a mind that is running out of its own history to draw from. And underneath all of this, unchanged and unchanging, is the emotional core. Homer wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants his children to still be his children. He wants the house on Evergreen Terrace and the dinner at the kitchen table and the television in the living room and the ordinary, mundane, unremarkable texture of a family life that he was not finished having when the vending machine fell. The dream gives him all of this. The dream preserves it perfectly. And every night, somewhere in Springfield General, a man in a hospital bed dreams his way through another episode of his own life. And the family he loves does not age, and the beer is cold, and the couch is warm, and Bart is always 10 years old. The national contest around who shot Mr. Burns represents something unusual in the history of American popular culture. A television show was not just asking its audience to engage with a narrative mystery. It was asserting, explicitly and publicly, that the mystery was solvable from the information the audience had been given. This is an important distinction. If the show's creators had said, "Here is a mystery, guess what you think? We will pick a winner randomly," the contest would be a promotional exercise. But they said the mystery could be solved from the evidence presented in Part 1. They said the clues were there. They said a viewer who paid careful attention would arrive at the correct answer. And then the answer was Maggie, and essentially nobody arrived at it. This creates a problem for the official verdict that the show has never adequately resolved. Either the clues were sufficient to lead a careful viewer to Maggie, in which case the contest's failure is a failure of the viewing public's analytical engagement, or the clues were not actually sufficient, and the show's assertion that the mystery was solvable was not accurate. The producer's response to the contest failure was to acknowledge it somewhat ruefully in commentary and move on. But the acknowledgement itself is telling. They know nobody solved it. They know the one person who did submit the correct answer appeared to be either very lucky or to have had access to production information. And they know this is the part that the DVD commentary admits obliquely, that the show's answer was not predetermined throughout the production of Part 1. The clues in Part 1 were written toward a range of possible answers. Maggie was selected as the answer after Part 1 was completed. This means the clues were not written to lead to Maggie specifically. They were written to be consistent with multiple possible answers. And then Maggie was chosen, and the clues were claimed to support her afterward. The mystery was reverse engineered, exactly as the theory suggests. Consider the DNA evidence more carefully. An eyelash belonging to a Simpson is found on Burns's suit. The investigation concludes this points to Maggie, but the eyelash could equally point to Bart, who has had documented confrontational relationships with Burns and who was at the town meeting. It could point to Homer, who has had the most sustained and frustrating relationship with Burns of any member of the family. It could even point to Lisa, who had a documented grievance over the school's oil well. The investigation skips over these possibilities and lands on Maggie because Maggie is the answer the show has decided on, not because the evidence demands it. Because the conclusion was chosen and the evidence was interpreted to support it, Chief Wiggum's investigation is presented as bumbling but ultimately successful. But look at what the investigation actually produces. Smithers confesses and is cleared. Other suspects are eliminated through musical numbers and comedic alibis. Homer is accused and nearly convicted on circumstantial evidence. And then Burns wakes up from a coma, a man who has just regained consciousness after a significant head trauma, who is by any medical standard a compromised witness and identifies the shooter. The criminal justice system in any real jurisdiction would be extremely cautious about relying on a coma patient's eyewitness identification as the primary basis for closing a criminal investigation. The reliability of memory under such circumstances is severely compromised. Burns might genuinely believe he is identifying accurately. He might be confusing what he actually remembers with what he has been told, or with fragments of experience that his recovering brain has assembled into a coherent but inaccurate narrative. Burns's identification of Maggie is treated as definitive. In Springfield, a man who just woke up from being shot pointing at a baby is considered sufficient grounds to close the case. The investigation ends. The case is closed. Maggie is the shooter. And Homer, in season 18, says he did it. Out loud, on camera, with no consequence. Mr. Burns's relationship with the passage of time is one of the show's most consistently interesting features, and it is one that rewards very close examination. Because Burns does not just happen to be old. Burns is visibly, documentably, specifically ancient in ways that the show keeps returning to, with a level of detail that suggests something more than casual world-building. His memories of the Gilded Age are not vague impressions. They are specific recollections of a specific economic and cultural era, the period of American history between the 1880s and the early 20th century, when industrial wealth was being accumulated at a rate and scale that had no precedent in American experience. Burns speaks about this era the way a person speaks about their formative years, with the particular texture of someone who was there, who participated, who understood the rules of that world from the inside. The Gilded Age was defined by the accumulation of monopoly power by a small number of extraordinarily wealthy industrialists. The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Morgans, the Vanderbilts, these were men who understood that control of essential infrastructure was the foundation of permanent power. If you controlled the railroads, everyone who needed to move goods or people paid you. If you controlled the oil, everyone who needed energy paid you. If you controlled the steel, everyone who needed to build anything paid you. Burns understood this lesson at the same time those men understood it. And his vehicle was power, electrical power, the infrastructure that, in the 20th century, became as essential as railroads and oil had been in the 19th. Burns built his nuclear plant not as an energy company, but as a monopoly. Springfield gets its electricity from Burns, or Springfield does not get electricity. The choice is not available. The market is not competitive. And Burns has maintained this monopoly for longer than most American institutions have existed. His Harvard attendance, the show has depicted Burns as a Yale man in some episodes and has been inconsistent about the detail connects him to the institutional infrastructure that served Gilded Age wealth. Elite universities in the late 19th and early 20th century were not primarily educational institutions. They were credentialing systems for a particular class of person. The people who were going to run the country's financial and legal and governmental systems, who needed to know each other, who needed to share a common cultural vocabulary, who needed the implicit trust that came from having gone to the same places and met the same people. Burns has had over a century to leverage that network. The politicians he has bought, the regulators he has captured, the judges whose decisions have gone conveniently in his favor, none of these relationships are random. They are the product of a man who has spent 100 years cultivating the specific connections that allow him to operate without consequence in a system that is theoretically designed to hold him accountable. And underneath all of this institutional maneuvering is the biological reality of the weekly treatments. Burns's power is meaningless if Burns is dead. And Burns should have been dead many decades ago by any normal accounting of biological time. The disease equilibrium is the most fascinating aspect of Burns's medical situation, and it deserves extended consideration. Every disease he has simultaneously contracted would, in any normal patient, be fatal on its own. Cancer, heart disease, tuberculosis, dozens of others, any one of these, in a patient without extraordinary medical intervention, would progress to mortality. The idea that they all coexist in perfect balance, none progressing because all are competing, is presented as comedy but resonates with a real medical phenomenon. In patients with multiple severe conditions, the body's resources are often divided among competing disease processes, with no single condition receiving the full biological resources it would need to progress quickly. This is not how Three Stooges syndrome is supposed to work. The show's framing implies a more comedic version of mutual cancellation, but the underlying medical reality it reflects is genuine. Burns's body has become an ecosystem of competing pathologies, and the weekly radiation treatments appear to function as the environmental management system that maintains the balance of that ecosystem. Remove the management, and the ecosystem collapses, some pathology gains dominance, the balance breaks, and Burns dies. Smithers knows this. He has spent his career understanding this. And this is why Smithers' devotion to Burns is not simply emotional, not simply the unrequited love that the show uses for comedy. It is functional. Smithers is the most important piece of Burns's life extension infrastructure, because Smithers is the person who manages the schedule, who ensures the treatments happen, who monitors Burns's condition between treatments, who provides the logistical continuity that keeps the entire system running. Without Smithers, Burns has no one who understands the protocol well enough to maintain it. His private physicians know how to administer the treatments. They do not know, with the intimacy that decades of observation provide, the specific warning signs that mean a treatment needs to be adjusted, accelerated, or altered. Smithers knows. Smithers has learned Burns's physiology the way a long-term caregiver learns the physiology of the person they care for, through sustained, attentive observation over years, through the accumulation of experiential knowledge that no medical chart can fully capture. Burns is alive because Smithers shows up every morning. That is not hyperbole. That is the mechanics of the situation as the show has established it. The show has always used Marge as the family's emotional center in a way that slightly undersells what it would actually mean to be Marge. The framing tends toward the admiring. She is patient, she is caring, she is the steady force that holds the household together without fully engaging with the weight of what that steadiness costs. Consider what Marge's daily life actually contains. She wakes up in a household where her husband's cognitive limitations mean that many basic domestic responsibilities default to her. Not because Homer is unwilling, he often tries, but because Homer's capacity for sustained attention, for anticipating consequences, for the kind of forward planning that keeps a household running, is genuinely compromised. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of fog, whatever the combination of causes, Homer cannot be relied upon to independently manage complex ongoing responsibilities. Marge manages them because someone has to, and she is the person in the household who can. Her 3 children each require a qualitatively different kind of parenting. Bart's specific brand of creative chaos requires constant anticipation of the next disaster, persistent engagement with an educational system that frequently wants to pathologize rather than understand him, and the particular emotional skill of loving a child who expresses that love through conflict. Lisa's isolation and intellectual hunger require a different attentiveness, the ability to see a child who appears self-sufficient and understand that self-sufficiency is not the same as not needing support. And Maggie, who the family routinely underestimates, requires the watchful presence of someone who might, if they were paying close enough attention, eventually notice that the baby is not behaving the way babies typically behave. Marge manages all of this, every day, without significant institutional support, within the constraints of a household budget that Homer's incompetence regularly endangers, in a town whose social infrastructure provides minimal support for families experiencing the specific stresses that the Simpson household experiences, and without, it should be noted, ever receiving the sustained acknowledgement from her husband or children that what she does is difficult or remarkable. The mystery of Marge is the mystery of what she does with her own interiority in the spaces between all of this management. The show gives us glimpses: her anxiety disorder, her brief gambling addiction, which the show treats with unusual seriousness, her painting, which appears in a few episodes as evidence of a creative capacity that the household's demands have largely squeezed out, her friendship with other women in Springfield, which the show visits occasionally as a reminder that Marge has a social life that exists independent of her family role. But the inner life that these glimpses suggest is never fully explored. The show keeps Marge at her station, patient, steady, indispensable, and the mystery of who she is when nobody needs her is one it has never been willing to sit with for long enough to actually answer. The blue hair matters here, as a symbol. It is upright, it is maintained, it requires effort every day to remain exactly as it is. And it is the one thing about Marge's external presentation that is entirely her own choice, entirely her own aesthetic, entirely the product of her own sustained will rather than the demands of the people around her. It is in a way the single visible evidence that Marge exists as a person outside of her function as a mother and wife. She maintains it. Every episode. Across 36 years, the hair stays up. Let's be specific about what Maggie has accomplished through strategic silence, because the list is longer and more impressive than the show ever pauses to acknowledge in any single place. She shot Mr. Burns. Whatever the full truth of the Burns shooting, and we have explored the uncertainty at length, Maggie is either the person who did it or the person whom Burns chose to blame, and in either case she emerged from the situation without consequence, charged with nothing, prosecuted for nothing, her life unchanged. A baby who either committed an act of violence against the richest man in Springfield or who was used as a shield by someone who needed a fall guy emerged from the situation perfectly intact. That is a remarkable outcome. She led a daycare rebellion. The longest daycare is 7 minutes long and depicts Maggie conducting a multi-stage operation inside an institution with its own security systems, behavioral protocols, and adult oversight. She does this while maintaining the appearance of a normal infant, while communicating entirely non-verbally with other infants who have their own limitations and needs, while adapting in real time to the failures of her initial approaches. The short film is a heist movie in miniature, and Maggie is its architect. She saved her family from physical danger on multiple occasions across the series. The specific episodes vary, but the pattern is consistent. In moments of genuine threat, Maggie acts while the adults around her either freeze, flee, or make the wrong decision. She sees clearly. She responds effectively. And then, because she is an infant, and the adults cannot accept that an infant has just saved them, she is credited either with luck or with nothing at all. She communicates in ways that the people around her consistently fail to fully register. The facial expressions she deploys are precise. They carry specific meaning. They are not the random emotional outputs of an infant experiencing stimuli without interpretation. They are directed communications, targeted at specific recipients, designed to convey specific information. The family occasionally reads them correctly. More often, they miss the message entirely because they are not looking at Maggie with the attention that her communications deserve. The strategic patience underlying all of this is the most remarkable thing about her. Because patience of this quality, the patience to maintain a cover for 36 years, to never slip into premature disclosure, to resist the temptation to demonstrate capability when demonstrating it would compromise, the strategy is not a trait that comes naturally to anyone, let alone to a person with the emotional regulation challenges typical of infancy. Maggie is not suppressing her communication because she has not developed language. She is suppressing it because she has made a calculation. The calculation is that the world as it currently operates is not worth revealing herself to. That the version of Springfield she inhabits, the version where she is overlooked, where she is underestimated, where she can move through the world without the friction that attaches itself to anyone who announces their own significance, is more useful to her than any alternative would be. And, connected to the radiation theory, this calculation takes on an additional dimension. If Maggie's extraordinary intelligence is the specific form that radiation-induced mutation has taken in her case, if the same contamination that reduced Homer's capacity amplified hers, then she is also the only person in Springfield who might be cognitively capable of fully understanding what the plant is doing to the town. Homer cannot understand it. The crayon and the radiation and the decades of diminishment have placed it beyond his reach. Lisa comes closest among the family. She asks the right questions. She identifies the right patterns, but she is 8 years old and lacks the institutional knowledge to act on what she observes. The adults who might be capable of understanding are the same adults whose capacity for understanding has been systematically compromised by decades of exposure to the contamination they would need to understand to address. Maggie might understand. Maggie might be watching the towers on the horizon and connecting them to the fish with 3 eyes, and the rats that glow, and the skin that is yellow on every person who has ever spent a meaningful portion of their life in this town. She might be sitting in her crib with her pacifier and her enormous eyes and her 3 decades of strategic silence, and she might know exactly what Springfield is and exactly what it has done to her family. And she has decided, or she is still deciding, what to do with that knowledge. The cultural power of the Simpsons prediction phenomenon deserves a more thorough examination than the simple debunking provides, because the debunking, while accurate, does not fully explain why the predictions feel so resonant even after you understand how they work. The show's writing staff, at its peak, was one of the most extraordinary assemblages of intellectual talent in the history of commercial television. The Harvard connection is real and significant. Multiple writers held graduate degrees from elite institutions, and the cultural influence of that educational environment on the show's comedy is visible in the density of its references, the sophistication of its satire, and the specific quality of its extrapolation. Extrapolation is the key word. The show, at its best, was not guessing randomly about the future. It was taking observable, present-tense trends and following them to their logical conclusions, then presenting those conclusions as absurdist comedy. The absurdism was the point. The joke was that the logical conclusion of the current trajectory was ridiculous. But the trajectory was real, and trajectories, if they persist, eventually arrive at their logical conclusions. The Trump prediction works because the trend the show identified, the mainstreaming of celebrity politics, the collapse of the distinction between entertainment fame and political credibility, the specifically American confusion of wealth with competence, was a real trend in 2000 that became a defining feature of the 2016 political landscape. The writers did not predict Trump. They identified the trajectory accurately enough that when the trajectory arrived at its conclusion, the conclusion looked like what they had drawn. The Disney-Fox prediction is even simpler to explain in these terms. Media consolidation was an accelerating phenomenon by the late 1990s. The regulatory environment that had previously constrained media ownership had been substantially relaxed. The economic incentives for consolidation, the ability to leverage content libraries across multiple distribution channels to achieve scale efficiencies in production and marketing, to reduce competitive pressure by acquiring competitors, were becoming increasingly compelling. Anyone paying careful attention to the entertainment industry in 1998 could have observed that the direction of travel was toward fewer, larger companies owning more of the total media landscape. The show identified that direction, followed it to an extreme conclusion: a single corporation so dominant that it consumed its own distribution network, and presented it as a joke. 21 years later, the joke arrived. What the meta-theory adds to this analysis, the idea that the show shapes the future rather than predicts it, is genuinely interesting and not fully captured by the debunking. Because even if every apparent prediction is explicable as extrapolation or coincidence, the show's cultural presence means that the apparent predictions enter the cultural bloodstream and change how people relate to the events. Those predictions appear to anticipate. When Trump announced his presidential candidacy by descending an escalator in Trump Tower in June 2015, the clip from the 2000 episode was immediately circulated alongside footage of the announcement. For millions of people, the relationship between the cartoon and the reality was not that the cartoon had predicted the reality. The relationship was that the reality had caught up to the joke, that the thing the show had satirized as absurd had, without anyone quite noticing the transition, become the thing that was happening. This is a different relationship between fiction and reality than prediction. The fiction did not cause the reality, but the fiction established a framework through which the reality was interpreted when it arrived. And a framework is not nothing. A framework shapes how you understand what you are seeing, how you respond to it, what actions feel possible in relation to it. Springfield normalized the absurd, and the absurd, once normalized, becomes available as a real-world option in a way it was not before. The theological implications of Ned Flanders' situation are genuinely strange, and the show, which has depicted God as a literal character who has literal conversations with Homer, has created a specific problem for its own cosmology by establishing that God is available for direct communication, and then demonstrating that Ned, the most devout person in Springfield, does not receive it. God talks to Homer. This is canon. Homer has had multiple face-to-face conversations with God across the series, in contexts that are not presented as dreams or delusions but as actual divine communication. God appears to Homer. God gives Homer advice. God tells Homer things about his life and its direction. The relationship between Homer and the divine is one of casual but genuine communication. God and Homer talk the way neighbors talk, without ceremony, without the formal architecture of prayer and silence. Ned prays every day. Ned structures his entire existence around his faith. He reads scripture, he attends services, he has organized his moral life, his parenting, his relationships, his professional conduct around his understanding of divine expectation. He has forgiven people who did not deserve forgiveness, maintained patience under circumstances that should have broken it, and continued to orient his life toward a divine presence that, by every depicted measure, does not return his attention. Within the show's cosmology, which is specific enough about God's existence and accessibility to make this a meaningful observation, God is not silent with Ned because God does not exist. God is silent with Ned in a universe where God has demonstrated a willingness to speak with Homer Simpson, which means God's silence with Ned is a choice. A divine choice to not communicate with the most devout person in Springfield while communicating freely with a man who approaches religion as a Sunday inconvenience. The show has various ways of reading this. One reading is comedic. God is drawn to the interesting cases, and Homer is more interesting than Ned. Another reading is theological. Genuine faith does not require divine communication, and Ned's faith is stronger for not depending on the confirmation that Homer receives. A third reading is the darkest. God in the Simpsons universe does not reward virtue. God responds to need, to chaos, to the person who is most lost and most in need of direction. Homer needs God in a way that Ned, with his behavioral conditioning and his structured faith, does not. So God shows up for Homer and leaves Ned to his prayers. This reading implies something disturbing about the spiritual economy of Springfield. The person who has invested the most in the relationship receives the least from it. The person who has invested almost nothing receives direct divine attention. The show is not making a theological argument, it is a comedy, not a treatise, but the pattern it depicts is specific enough to constitute something like a thesis statement about how the universe operates in Springfield. The universe in Springfield operates the way everything else in Springfield operates, not by rewarding virtue or effort or sustained commitment, by serving the needs of the system, the loop, the ongoing requirements of the narrative. Homer needs divine intervention to survive his adventures. Ned does not need divine intervention to go to church and be polite to his neighbors. So Homer gets God and Ned gets silence, and the gap between them never closes. That gap, the gap between the man who does everything right and receives nothing and the man who does everything wrong and somehow survives and is loved and finds his way home every episode, that gap is The Simpsons. It is not just Ned versus Homer. It is the show's persistent 36-year argument with the idea that the world is organized around merit. It is not. The world of Springfield is organized around survival and need, and the specific chaotic momentum of one particular family on Evergreen Terrace. And Ned Flanders, perfect and patient, and permanently unpunished in the sense that no divine vengeance has claimed him, but also permanently unrewarded in the sense that nothing good ever finally, durably comes to him, is the show's evidence for that argument. He waves from his driveway every episode, and Homer waves back, without fully knowing why Ned's wave sometimes carries in it a weight that a friendly wave should not have to carry. The floating timeline is the structural feature of The Simpsons that has provoked the most critical discussion, and it is also the feature that, when you step back from the individual complaints about continuity and age consistency, reveals the most about what the show is actually doing. Every long-running animated show uses a floating timeline. This is not unique to The Simpsons. But The Simpsons has run long enough that the floating timeline has stopped being a production convenience and has become a statement. When a show has been on the air for 36 years, the decision to not allow its characters to age is not a default anymore. It is a choice that has been actively renewed, season by season, for 3.5 decades. The choice has cultural consequences that extend beyond the show itself, because the Simpson family has been the most consistently visible model of the American nuclear family in popular culture for longer than any other fictional household in television history. They have been the American family for 36 years, and the American family, as The Simpsons presents it, does not change. It does not age. It does not face the consequences of time. Homer does not retire. Marge does not become an empty nester. Bart does not go to college, does not have relationships that mature, does not develop the professional identity that would follow from being 10 years old for 36 years of lived experience. Lisa does not go to graduate school, does not pursue the career that her intelligence and commitment would build, does not become the person that every episode since season 1 has been suggesting she would become. None of this happens. The loop holds. The family stays at the kitchen table, and the episodes keep arriving, and the credits keep playing, and the years keep passing in the real world, while Springfield stays exactly where it was in December 1989. What does this preserve? What is the loop protecting? It preserves a specific version of American middle-class family life that, in the real world, is increasingly under pressure. Homer's single-income salary supports a house, a family, a car, and a life that, in most American cities in the present day, would be impossible on the wages of a nuclear plant safety technician. The economics of the Simpson household are the economics of a specific era of American prosperity, the post-war decades during which a single factory or plant salary could genuinely support a family in a house with a yard. That era is over in the real world. Its economic foundations have been dismantled by the same forces that the show satirizes: corporate power, wage stagnation, the specific hostility of late-stage capitalism, to the kind of economic security that Homer's life requires. But in Springfield, the era persists. Homer's salary is always sufficient. The house is always intact. The family is always together. The specific material conditions of a specific historical moment are preserved in amber, and the audience visits them every episode. This is what we are protecting when we maintain the loop. Not just the characters, the version of America that makes the characters possible. The version of America in which a Homer Simpson can live the way Homer lives, not richly, but stably, with the specific dignity of material security, and in which that stability is not constantly under threat from the forces that have, in the real world, made it increasingly inaccessible. Springfield is not a prediction of where America is going. Springfield is a preservation of where America was, or rather where a certain part of America was, for a certain period, for a certain kind of family. And we watch it with the specific longing of people who understand, at some level, that the thing being preserved is a thing we have already lost. The floating timeline is not lazy writing. The floating timeline is grief, collectively organized. We have agreed not to let The Simpsons age because aging The Simpsons would mean acknowledging that the America they represent has already aged into something we do not fully recognize anymore. And we are not ready to acknowledge that. We may never be ready. So the loop holds. The credits play. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Maggie has her pacifier. Homer stumbles through the door at 5:30 from another day at the plant, and we watch. And we feel something that is not quite happiness but is very close to it, the specific warmth of returning to a place that has not changed, in a world that has changed too fast to follow. Springfield will be here when this episode ends. It will be here when the next one starts. It will be here in another 10 years, another 20, as long as there is an audience willing to maintain the loop by coming back. And we will come back, we always do. Because the loop is ours as much as it is theirs. We built it together, and tearing it down would mean saying goodbye to something we are not yet willing to say goodbye to. There is something worth sitting with before we close the loop completely. Something about the way all of these theories, the radiation, the coma, the shooting, the immortality, the denial, the geography, the predictions, the silence orbit each other, because individually each theory is interesting. Taken together, they are something else. They are a portrait, not a portrait of Springfield specifically, a portrait of a particular kind of American experience. The experience of being inside a system that is actively working against you, being unable to fully see the system because the system has compromised your ability to see it, and choosing or being forced to keep showing up anyway. Because the people you love are there, because the alternative is worse, because the fog is warmer than the clarity. Homer embodies this experience most completely. He is the central figure, the man around whom everything orbits, the person the show returns to episode after episode because Homer is legible in a way that Springfield's other mysteries are not. You can see, in Homer, the entire architecture of what the town has done to its residents. You can see the potential that was suppressed, the damage that was inflicted, the compensations that were built around the damage, and the specific warmth and love that persist underneath and through all of it. Homer is not a cautionary tale. The show has never wanted him to be a cautionary tale. He is an everyman in the fullest sense, not the everyman of aspiration, the person everyone hopes they are, but the everyman of reality, the person most people actually are. Limited, well-meaning, damaged by circumstances they did not choose, loved despite everything they get wrong, stumbling forward because the alternative is standing still. And Springfield is not a cautionary tale either. For all the darkness, the theories illuminate the radiation, the cover-ups, the rigged systems, the manufactured consent. Springfield is also genuinely funny, genuinely warm, genuinely alive in the way that only a place with 36 years of accumulated history and character can be alive. The darkness is real, and the warmth is also real. Both things are true simultaneously, because that is how real places work. The coma theory, if you take it seriously as more than a clever reframe, transforms the warmth into something almost unbearably tender. A dying man dreaming of his family, keeping them safe in the amber of his unconscious mind, giving each of them, in the dream, the best version of themselves he can imagine, making Maggie extraordinary because he cannot see her grow up, so he makes her capable of surviving anything, making Lisa brilliant and principled because he knows she deserves a world that understands her, even if the dream Springfield cannot quite provide it, making Bart his mischievous, loving, infuriating, essential self because Bart without chaos is not Bart, and Homer cannot dream a version of his son that is not entirely, authentically Bart, and making Marge always, in every episode, in every version of every story, the person he loves most in a world where he has been lucky enough to be loved in return. The coma is not a tragedy. The dream is not a prison. It is, as anyone who loves the show has always felt, without necessarily being able to articulate it, a home. Imperfect and impossible and warm and funny and sad and endlessly renewable. Every Sunday night we go home to Evergreen Terrace. Every episode we sit down at the table with Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, and we are, for half an hour, inside the dream, inside the loop, inside the warmth of a family that does not age because we will not let it, that survives everything because it must, that resets after every catastrophe because the only alternative is the ending, and we are not ready for the ending. We have never been ready for the ending. On Springfield's denial mechanism, a deeper look, the collective denial that the principal and the pauper episode makes explicit is worth examining in greater depth, because it is the mechanism that allows every other mystery in this script to persist. Without the denial, without Springfield's extraordinary institutional capacity for choosing comfortable fiction over uncomfortable fact, the radiation theory would have been acted upon decades ago. The coma would have been acknowledged. The Burns shooting would have been properly investigated. The plant's violations would have triggered federal intervention. The denial is the engine. Everything else is what the engine makes possible. Small towns in the real world have a version of this. Not as dramatic as a judge issuing a legal decree criminalizing the acknowledgement of a false identity, not as organized as a town meeting that votes to maintain a lie. But the underlying social mechanism, the collective agreement to not speak about certain things, to redirect attention away from certain truths, to treat the official version of events as the binding one, regardless of what the evidence suggests, this is a real feature of real communities. And Springfield has simply made it explicit. Springfield has organized what is usually an informal, unconscious process into something that resembles a municipal institution. The denial has rules. It has enforcement mechanisms. It has a track record of action against people who violate it. The real Seymour Skinner, expelled from his own life for the crime of being real. The people of Springfield are not stupid. This is the crucial point. The radiation theory suggests cognitive impairment, and that impairment is real. The show provides evidence for it. But impairment of the degree the radiation theory proposes would not be sufficient to explain the coherence and consistency of the denial. Cognitively impaired populations do not organize consistent, enforceable social contracts around the suppression of inconvenient truths. That requires a functional social intelligence that impairment cannot fully account for. The denial works in Springfield because the residents of Springfield have made a collective assessment of their situation and concluded that the truth is too expensive. Not too complicated to understand, too expensive to act on, because acting on the truth about the plant would mean confronting Burns. Confronting Burns would mean disrupting the economic infrastructure that keeps the town alive. And disrupting that infrastructure might mean the end of Springfield as a functioning community. This is not irrational. It is a perfectly rational calculation made by people who understand their dependency clearly enough to protect it, even at the cost of the truth. The denial is the protection. The denial keeps Burns in place, keeps the plant running, keeps the electricity on, keeps the economy moving, keeps the town alive in the specific diminished form that has been available to it since the plant's first day of operation. Springfield knows what it is. Springfield knows what the plant is doing to it. Springfield has made the choice, collectively and repeatedly, to accept what the plant does in exchange for what the plant provides. And the denial is the ongoing renewal of that choice, the daily, communal, enforced decision to not look too closely at the towers on the hill. The real Seymour Skinner was expelled because he threatened this choice. He arrived with evidence that the official narrative was a fiction and asked the community to act on that evidence. The community declined, not because they were too cognitively impaired to understand the evidence, because acting on the evidence would set a precedent. If you acknowledge the truth about Skinner, you have to acknowledge the truth about everything else. And everything else includes the plant, and Burns, and the fish with 3 eyes, and the yellow skin, and the 4 fingers, and the decades of managed cognitive damage that have made Springfield what it is. The community expelled the truth not because they could not handle it, but because they understood, precisely, where handling it would lead. That is the most disturbing reading of Springfield. Not the contamination, not the coma, not the shooting or the immortality or the geographic impossibility. The most disturbing reading is that the people of Springfield know, that they have always known, and that they have chosen this anyway because the alternatives are all worse. On what happens at the end of the loop? Every loop ends. This one will too. At some point, whether the decision is made by the network, by the writers, by the cultural moment finally shifting in a way that leaves the show behind, The Simpsons will end. There will be a final episode, a final couch gag, a final sequence in which Homer drives to work and the music plays and Springfield spreads out below the titles. The show has never fully committed to how that ending will look. It has depicted possible endings, flash forwards, alternative futures, what-if scenarios, but always as speculative, always as one possible version of a future that the floating timeline refuses to actually arrive at. When the ending comes, it will have to make a choice about what the 36 years meant. Whether the loop was a tragedy or a gift. Whether Springfield was a prison or a home. Whether Homer's survival of everything was the comedy it appeared to be or the dream it might have been. Whether Maggie's silence was patience or limitation. Whether Lisa's frustration was the price of intelligence in an indifferent world or the preparation for something that the show never got to depict. The coma theory offers one ending. Homer wakes up, he opens his eyes in Springfield General, and the first face he sees is Marge's. And she is older, and his children are older, and the world has moved on without him, in ways he will spend the rest of his waking life catching up to. It is the saddest possible ending and also, in its way, the most hopeful. Because it means Homer gets to go home. Really home. To the version of the house on Evergreen Terrace that exists in real time, with real consequences, with children who have grown and a wife who has been waiting and a life that is different from the dream but is his. The radiation theory offers a different ending. The plant closes. The contamination is exposed. Burns faces something that resembles, however imperfectly, accountability. And Springfield begins the long, uncertain process of becoming a place where the truth is not criminal, where the fish in the river do not have 3 eyes, where the children who grow up there grow up into something other than the specific mutations that 36 years of exposure have produced. The collective denial theory offers the ending that the principal and the pauper episode gestures at. Someone speaks the truth. Not the truth about Skinner, that truth has already been suppressed. The real truth. About the plant. About what Burns has done. About the 3-eyed fish and the glowing rats and the skeletons in the basement and the safety violations and the decades of deliberate contamination of a community that depended on him and had no one else to depend on. Someone says it out loud. And for the first time in Springfield's history, the town does not vote to forget. None of these endings exist. The show has not aired them. The loop has not broken. But the theories hold open the possibility that it could. That underneath all the accumulated seasons and all the reset buttons and all the fog, there is a Springfield that could one day become something other than what it is. And that possibility, the possibility of change in a place defined by its refusal to change, is perhaps the most radical thing any theory about this show can offer. Springfield does not have to be this way forever. Neither do we. A final note on why this show matters. 36 years is a long time to care about anything. Television shows are not supposed to last this long, or at least they were not supposed to before The Simpsons demonstrated that they could. The show has outlasted the cultural moments it satirized, the technologies it depicted, the political administrations it lampooned, and in some cases the people who made it. It has continued past every reasonable expectation of continuation and kept going, kept finding episodes to make, kept returning to the same family in the same house, on the same street. This longevity is not an accident. It is the product of something the show understood from the beginning and has never forgotten: that the family is the unit, not the jokes, not the celebrity guest appearances, not the predictions that came true or the mysteries that were never resolved. The family, Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, sitting on their couch, watching television, living their improbable and impossible and deeply recognizable lives. This is what the show is. Everything else is context. Every theory and every mystery and every piece of evidence for the darkness underneath Springfield is context for the central thing, which is a family that loves each other across 36 years of difficulty and disaster and reset and renewal. The darkness matters because it makes the love visible. You see Homer's love for his family most clearly when you understand what has been done to him, how much he has had taken from him, how diminished he was made before he even had the chance to choose who he would be. You understand the love because you understand the damage. You feel the warmth of the couch on Evergreen Terrace most fully when you know about the towers on the hill and the water in the tap and the fog that rolls through Homer's mind every single day. The theories do not ruin the show. The theories are the show, seen from the angle that shows its structure, and the structure is a family. Imperfect and limited and yellow and four-fingered and radioactively altered and possibly dreaming and unable to age, but a family. Together, every episode, surviving. That is what we come back for. That is what the loop preserves. And that is what will be here, on Evergreen Terrace, when you wake up tomorrow morning. It always is. Number. The mysteries the show planted and never returned to. There is a category of Simpsons mystery that does not fit neatly into any of the 10 sections we have moved through, and yet it deserves attention precisely because these are the mysteries the show seems to have forgotten it introduced. Not the long-running ambiguities, those are clearly deliberate. These are the threads that were pulled once, briefly, and then left dangling as though the writers moved on, and the loose end simply vanished into the fabric of the series. The first is the matter of Sideshow Bob's brother, Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. Sideshow. Bob has a brother named Cecil, who appeared in a memorable episode and who has the same elaborate intelligence, the same theatrical menace, and the same deep personal grievance as his brother. Cecil's episode resolved in his imprisonment, but the show's implication that Cecil's scheme was connected to years of resentment toward Bob, who Cecil believed had stolen the Sideshow Bob role that Cecil himself had auditioned for, opened a question about the Terwilliger family that the show never fully answered. If Bob and Cecil both produced a child of this specific caliber, brilliant, theatrical, homicidally committed, what does that say about the Terwilliger family more broadly? The show depicted their parents briefly, as culturally refined people who seemed baffled by their sons' criminal careers. But the mystery of where two men this extreme came from, and what the family dynamics looked like that produced them, is one the show gestured at without exploring. The second unresolved thread is the nature of the Simpson family's relationship to the town's founding. Various episodes have implied that the Simpson family is more deeply embedded in Springfield's history than Homer's current position as a plant worker would suggest. The town was founded by ancestors whose names surface occasionally: Jebediah Springfield, whose statue stands in the center of town and whose true history the show explored in a particularly good episode, was at least tangentially connected to a settler who bore a name similar to the Simpson family's. If the Simpson family has been in Springfield since its founding, if they are not arrivals, but originals, people whose roots in the town go as deep as the town's roots go, then Homer's position at the plant is not just ironic, it is a fall from something. The descendants of founders have become employees. The people who built Springfield are now the people most harmed by the institutions that have grown up over the foundations they laid. The show has never fully committed to this reading, and the evidence for it is scattered and inconsistent in the way that all Simpsons continuity is scattered and inconsistent. But the thread exists. And the thread suggests that Homer's relationship to Springfield is more complicated than it appears that the town he lives in was, at some point in the deep past, more his than it currently is. The third thread is the mystery of why Flanders's house was rebuilt so badly after the hurricane. This is treated entirely as a joke about the incompetence of community effort and Homer's specifically toxic participation in group projects. But consider the geography of the situation. Ned's house is destroyed. The community rebuilds it. Homer is involved in the rebuilding, and his involvement produces a structurally unsound result. The house collapses. Under the collective denial framework, the framework established by the principal and the pauper episode, there is a reading in which the bad house is not accidental. Springfield as a community has a complex and unresolved relationship with Ned Flanders' goodness. Ned's persistent virtue is an implied reproach to everyone around him who is not as virtuous. His presence is a constant reminder of the gap between how Springfield's residents behave and how they might, in different circumstances, choose to behave. A community that resolves cognitive dissonance through denial might not consciously, not through any organized plan, resolve its discomfort with Ned's goodness by ensuring that his life does not look too appealing. If the rebuilt house had been beautiful, if Ned's recovery from disaster had been triumphant and smooth, the implicit contrast with everyone else's more chaotic lives would have been difficult to manage. The bad house is Springfield's unconscious resolution of the Ned problem. Make his recovery go wrong and the envy becomes pity. Make his life look difficult enough and nobody has to feel inadequate about their own. This is almost certainly not what the writers intended. The bad house is a joke about incompetence. But within the framework of how Springfield operates through collective, semi-conscious agreement to maintain certain fictions and suppress certain truths, the bad house reads as one more expression of the town's deep, structural discomfort with the one person in it who genuinely tries. The fourth thread is Grandpa Simpson's time in the war and what he knows that he has never told anyone. Abe Simpson served in World War II. He was part of a generation of Americans whose wartime experience shaped everything that followed, and the show has occasionally given Grandpa episodes that hint at a wartime history considerably more complicated than the standard veteran narrative experiences that were ambiguous, morally murky, connected to the larger currents of that specific historical moment, in ways that the show's comedy has always kept just out of full view. Grandpa made a deal with Burns. We know this. The deal was about silence, Grandpa's silence, in exchange for Homer's guaranteed employment. But a man who is willing to make that deal with Burns, who is willing to trade his integrity for his son's security, is a man who has made that kind of calculation before. The war was full of that kind of calculation. The specific compromises of that era, what you agreed to overlook, what you agreed to do, what you agreed to be, are the kind of thing that shapes a person for the rest of their life. Grandpa's unreliability as a narrator of his own history is a running joke in the show. His stories change, his timeline shifts, his memories contradict each other. This is treated as the cognitive vagaries of age, an old man who remembers things poorly. But within the framework of the show's themes, it could also be the specific unreliability of a man who has reasons to not remember certain things too clearly. Who has constructed his own version of events, deliberately, around the things he chose to do and the deals he chose to make. These threads, Sideshow, Bob's Family, the Simpson founding history, Ned's bad house, Grandpa's war, are small mysteries by the standards of this script. They do not reshape the entire show the way the radiation theory or the coma theory reshapes it. But they are the show's texture. They are the evidence that Springfield is dense in the way that real places are dense, full of histories and connections and unresolved questions that nobody has gotten around to answering yet. The show planted them and moved on. But they are still there, in the fabric, waiting for someone to come back and pull the thread. If you have made it this far, if you are still in Springfield, still listening, still somewhere in the dim, small hours of wherever you are in the world, then you already know the answer to why you are still here. It is not because the mysteries are unresolved, although they are. It is not because the theories are elegant, although they are. It is not even because the show is 36 years of extraordinary creative work, although it is all of those things. You are still here because Springfield is warm, because even in the dark, even when the cooling towers are humming and the water is running through pipes that carry whatever the plant has put into it, and the fish in the river have more eyes than they should, even then, there is a house on Evergreen Terrace with a light on in the kitchen and a family sitting down to dinner, and someone who loves someone else in the only way they know how to, which is imperfectly and completely and every single day without fail. You are here because Homer is here, because despite everything, despite the crayon and the radiation and the fog and the employer who stole his mother and the 36 years of stumbling and failing and getting back up and stumbling again, Homer loves his family, and the family loves him, and that love, in a world that has given all of them every reason to give up on each other, has not yet run out. The loop holds because love holds it. And love, as the show has quietly been demonstrating for 3.5 decades, is stranger and more durable and more radioactive proof than anyone ever predicted. Number, the question behind all the questions. Every mystery in this script has an official answer and a real answer. The official answer is what the show provides, the character who did it, the event that explains it, the episode that addresses it and then moves on. The real answer is what the evidence suggests when you look at it, without the comfort of the official version standing between you and the implications. The official answer to who shot Mr. Burns is Maggie. The real answer is that we do not know, and cannot know, because the investigation was conducted by people who needed it to end and ended it before it was finished. The official answer to why nobody ages in Springfield is that the show uses a floating timeline, a standard production convention for long-running animated series. The real answer is that 36 years of deliberate choice to maintain that convention is not a convention anymore. It is a statement about what Springfield is and what we need it to be. The official answer to the question of what the nuclear plant is doing to Springfield is that it is providing electricity and employment and the comedic context for Homer's working life. The real answer is that the plant has been the central fact of Springfield's existence since before the first episode, and that every yellow face, every extra eye on every fish, every inexplicable physical resilience, every reset button, and every forgotten catastrophe traces back to the cracked cooling towers on the hill. The official answer to whether Homer is in a coma is no. Al Jean said no. The show has said no. The fake deleted scene was planted by hackers, and Homer woke up in April 1993 and has been genuinely awake ever since. The real answer is that the evidence does not require the official answer, and the pattern the theory identifies is not erased by the official denial. The official answer to why Springfield cannot be found on a map is that the show uses geographic ambiguity as a universal design principle, making Springfield a place that could be anywhere so that every viewer can feel it is their town. The real answer is that the ambiguity has been maintained so consistently and so deliberately that it has become something more a structural feature of Springfield that serves purposes beyond narrative convenience. The question behind all of these questions is the same one, asked different ways in every theory and every mystery we have explored. It is the question of what you do when the official answer and the real answer are different. When the comfortable version and the true version diverge. When the town has voted to criminalize the true version and exile anyone who insists on it. The people of Springfield answer this question the same way, every episode. They choose the official answer. They choose the comfortable version. They maintain the agreed-upon reality, and they go to work at the plant, and they eat their donuts, and they vote at the town meeting, and they forget what needs to be forgotten, and remember what needs to be remembered, and the loop holds. And the credits play, and nobody ages, and the towers keep humming on the hill above the town. We answer the question differently. We watch, we notice. We pull at the threads and examine what comes loose and sit with the implications of what we find. We ask the questions that Springfield will not ask. We follow the evidence where it leads, even when it leads somewhere darker than the comedy wants to go. And when we are done asking, when the credits have played one more time and the episode has ended and Springfield has reset to its default configuration, we go home. To Evergreen Terrace, to the kitchen table, to the family on the couch, because the questions matter, and the family matters more. That is the final mystery of The Simpsons, not the plant or the coma or the shooting or the immortality. The mystery of why a show this dark is also this warm, why a town this broken produces this much love, why a family this damaged cognitively, biologically, economically, generationally manages, episode after episode, to be okay. The answer is not satisfying. The answer is not rational. The answer does not resolve any of the theories or explain any of the evidence. The answer is just, they do. They manage. They make it work. Homer stumbles home and Marge opens the door and the kids are noisy and dinner is ready and the light is on in the kitchen and somehow, against every odd the radiation and the coma and the plant and the loop have stacked against them, the Simpsons are okay. That is not nothing. After 36 years and 100 mysteries and all of this darkness carefully examined, that is actually everything. The light is still on at Evergreen Terrace. It will be on when you wake up. Homer will be on the couch. Marge will be upstairs. The kids will be exactly as you left them. And the towers on the hill will be humming their quiet and permanent hum over a town that has decided, collectively and without a vote, that it is not yet ready to change. We made that decision with them. We make it every time we come back, and we will keep making it, because the loop is warm and the family is there, and some things, even impossible things, even radioactive things, even things that exist in the dream of a man who may have been sleeping since April 1993, are worth holding on to. Good night,